ranking was openly proud of, and therefore even mocked Nebula because of his failed attempt. But Nebula couldn't blame Hegemonia for coming out with such confidence, because this was an overpowered strategy all along. As it is easy to increase the population due to the nature of the orc race, and as the number of believers increased, faith resources were also quickly acquired. Science, technology, and culture were then gained through invasion. This was a good strategy that constantly received good reviews because the great amount of faith accumulated, and the large number of orcs resulted in an advantage in war, and the fact that the opponent chose the sky as their realm meant that they were aware of and took into account Nebula's choice of skill, the science development skill. This prevented him from using majority of his aerial arsenal. They even prepared behind the scene to counter his nuclear attack, seeing that they can summon a spirit chain apostle with a high caliber at such a fast rate. However, Nebula remained unimpressed as this was all too obvious for him. So even if his opponent has large territory that even reached the skies, it is still just a sky above their heads, so he just need to have a weapon beyond it. And because of this realization, he had prepared an AI-operated military satellite made from ancient relics, equipped with the rods from God. Even Hegemonia was shocked to see that Nebula has this weapon, as he didn't expect after a nuclear weapon. He still has a high-mass weapon more destructive than the last. With this, Hegemonia could only scream at Nebula to stop, but Nebula doesn't give a shit to what his opponents wanted, and therefore he just let his attack continue. It is just a few tungsten, but Nebula was confident that it would fail. With the rod adding up the accumulated gravitational acceleration, it has the speed approximately 10 times the speed of sound. And with this, the rod just went through the apostle like it was butter, and when it made contact on the ground, it made such a devastating sound as it penetrated the ground with such force on par with a nuclear weapon, just without the nuclear after effects. But still, the Emperor was now dead. The underground temple collapsed along with the Imperial Palace, and therefore the faith that Hegemonia built will disappear. And after that happens, the apostles will also disappear. With this, Nebula won, and was still the #1 ranker of the game. But just like any player would do, before he leaves, he told Hegemonia GG. Skill issue? However, Hegemonia couldn't accept such outcome as he was just a loser after all, and so he demanded another.
Let's just get all the gems we can. We're gonna use the loner decks. We're gonna start 100%ing this.
But just like before,
bullshit.
Nebula remained unimpressed, and so he stoically just declined Hegemonia's request. Still, he can't help but wonder if Hegemonia
learn how to
has still
play
few
Yu-Gi-Oh! A
tricks
little
up
bit
his
too here
sleeves,
and there.
as he still
Learn
strongly
what decks
believed to
we're
win
gonna be up
against him.
against.
However, being the #1 ranker for a while, he knew all too well that there was nothing that Hegemonia could do that would surprise him, as the game itself has nothing new to offer, and the fact that he was able to complete all the achievements available and maintained first place in the rankings was enough of a proof that the game is nothing more to offer to him. And so, slowly but surely, he decided to quit playing. To his surprise, before he could leave, a message suddenly popped up on his screen, which initially irritated him at first, because who on earth is bothering him at this time of day? Still, curiosity got the best of him, and so he opened the message, only to be met with praise, congratulating him for having the only one who has cleared all achievements. And the game really appreciated that he enjoyed Lost World so far, but seeing such message only confused him. He could only see these things when the game would announce an end of service. But due to the game's popularity, it seems like it wouldn't be the case, so he clicked more to see what's more of this sudden message. To his surprise, it revealed to him that the game he had been playing was just an early beta access, and would be scheduled to be officially released. So as the top player Nebula, they give him a rare opportunity to enjoy the game before official service. And because he is on the pursuit of seeing more of this game,
600 gemstones? Damn, I should have done this
and with this,
forever ago.
he was instantly sucked in a sea of codes, where binary codes float endlessly, but not even a moment passed. Darkness ensues soon after. After that, the empty space began to reveal the countless of stars that occupied it. Under those said stars was a familiar figure. It was Nebula's game avatar. Opening his eyes, light shines mirroring the magnificent sight before him. A view far from what he was used to. Beautiful, but it felt like it was a ruin of some sort, where stone columns in a rugged style reminiscent of Roman temples circled the place. But the strange thing was that the sky was black, even though the horizon was visible. This could only mean that there is no atmosphere. Obviously, one wouldn't be able to breathe without an atmosphere. And looking at himself, he recognizes that he was in the body of the character he was playing. And so he got up thinking that—
Hold on, this mine was getting intense.
Unexpectedly,
I gotta— oh, pendulum summoning. Okay. We're learning how to pendulum summon to do odd eyes. Fun shenanigans, I like it. So we're going second to draw a card. Okay. I don't think it matters which side we play.
instantly raised questions of how this
What
figure
side
got
we
to know
play
his
it
real
on?
name. Who is this woman? And more than that, what does she meant by
This is
being
just me
chosen?
testing,
Before he
and
could
then
find
we summon
answers,
everything in our
shadows suddenly
hand.
begun to appear before his eyes, which surprised him at first. But he knew the silhouettes of the shadows were those of ordinary people. He knew this because the shadows were also surprised and looking around just like he was. And noticing that Nebula was already aware of what the shadows truly were, Alden explained why they were covered in mystery. That is because they all come from the same world, and since there is a chance of them knowing one another, they have covered everyone in shadows for a fair game. But this doesn't explain why they were here exactly, and so she decided to get straight to the point. She raised her hand and revealed to them the Earth. Looking at it closer, the continents of this planet was
Okay,
different
cool.
from what Earth
We're
had.
doing
It
Link
was a view
now.
of the place they have seen many times, so it was undoubtedly the planet of the Lost World. In this vast lost world, where the players had become a true god. This surprised everyone, even if Nebula couldn't hear any sound from other players. He felt it very well. There are people who felt embarrassed at how
Linking for
cringeworthy
flyers,
the statement
nice.
was. The dialogue felt like it came from an edgelord. Still, since they got nothing better to do, they continued to listen what Alden had to say. So Alden told them that the lost world they knew of isn't a world that simply exists in the game.
Special
It's a land
summon these
abandoned by
two.
the gods due to an incident in the past. On that planet, a once brilliant civilization blossomed.
Backup
Different
dancer,
races lived in harmony.
secretary.
However, for unknown reasons, the gods left it, and so now it's time for new gods. And the game that they played was created with the purpose of finding suitable new candidates for that.
Honeybot is
Just by trying,
amazing.
they can become god. It's essentially like the Lost World they had played, where at first, only low-class creatures would believe in them. But if they succeed in increasing their number of followers, they may become the one and only god of the
This should have been
planet, and the
special
world
summon.
becomes theirs. And they'll be able to do everything they want, and all the desires they have ever dreamed of it is feasible as a god in this world. This was a chance of a lifetime. But things are just too good to be true. He felt that there was something Aldine still wasn't addressing.
Decode
And so Nebula
talker.
asks the precaution of giving up now. To his surprise, if they give up, they will just go back to their daily life and would lose their memories of this place, which was pretty convenient. And so Nebula asks if this was still the same if he gives up mid-challenge, but just as expected. They were not so generous to let them do that. This begged Nebula to follow up a question, asking what happens if he is defeated by other gods. And Alden just simply answered that, if that happens, he will met a godly end, and they will welcome it. This is what Nebula had expected. If it was a game where the victor could gain everything, it stood to reason that the participants would have to risk their lives. And should this real-world competition follow the game The Lost World, one might have to risk more than their life. But this just only made him smile. The exhilarating feeling of putting their lives at risks made this game more interesting for him, and so there was no reason for him to give up now. Now that was clarified to all the players. Alden asks the people who plans to give up to step up now and notify her, while for those who want to take on the challenge, she presented cards for them to choose, where it can present them a small area where they will begin their journey. Seeing this, Nebula recognized that it's really just like in the game. The means to start the game with selecting a small area. However, his trains of thought was disrupted as he noticed that other people are giving up already. It started with a few people, but soon others followed as well. With this, Nebula started to analyze how many people was left. Obviously, the starting number of the people that had transported in this place was also the same amount of player of the Lost World could allow in a single planet for a single match, and it was 32. That means the final number of people left was 27, which was still a lot of competition to be the only god of this world. However, his trains of thought were disturbed yet again by the mysterious woman asking him to choose a card first. This could only mean that the order of which they can chose was the same order of their rank, and so he did the honors to be the first one to choose. But as he lifted the card, his eyes grew larger as he was in shock to see that he got this small area of all things. Still, before he could even say anything, he was instantly transported into the Lost World, and into his designated small area, where a beautiful greenery and a stream of river could be seen, and within those rivers, different creatures inhabits the place. However, the inhabitants were more different from what's on Earth, as the supposedly frog actually has a well-toned body that could be easily called daddy. Of how lean he looks, still, it got a heart of a golden retriever, as it was just happy to catch some fish. In the midst of this, a blue butterfly emanating with mysteriousness just casually passed by them. This butterfly turned out to be Nebula's familiar. This is what he got from those cards. The small area of insects. It wasn't insects in a strict sense, but rather a category that covered, to some extent, several arthropods and crustaceans. But among the 32 small areas that could have been selected first, insects wasn't very well evaluated and actually had the lowest winning rate according to actual data. but he didn't let this affect him, since everything depends on how one uses it. It is even backward compatible with birds, so it is quite useful in the beginning. However, another problem arises. The starting point where he was at is the eastern end of the continent. This place had a disadvantage in advancing. This means that the battles don't happen pretty often in the beginning, so gaining benefits through early engagement is near impossible to accomplish, and therefore an aggressive strategy like he was used to won't be viable. In that sense, he just needs to focus on finding a suitable species as a starter, and a race that eats insect would be a good starting race, like those frogmen for example. But what bothers him about this tribe was its numbers, and that is because Lost World enables a god to exert influence on creatures equal to the level of faith it possesses. However, the bigger the group, the less little miracles were cared about. So even though it may be a benefit to gain a big tribe in the beginning, there was a risk of vainly consuming all 10 faith points without seeing any result. And this amount of faith points is way too small to have any influence on the group of frogmen. With this, he looked for another group nearby, leading him to wander to a more desolated place, where a small group of lizardmen was wandering around aimlessly. This species was also a great candidate, since lizardmen also eat insects, and they can survive in such extreme condition, unlike the frogmen, so he was more compelled to look at them closer. This made him notice of how their number had dwindled a little, which was actually great, as it was just the right amount that Nebula wanted. To his surprise, the group even contained the sick and elderly. With this, he realized that this lizardmen came from the original group, and the reason why they were out in the desert, because they must have been pushed out in a power struggle, and at the back of this small group there was a young, wounded lizardman. This was such a perfect setup for Nebula, because the more he feels abandoned by the world, the more difficult and tired he would feel, and with this, he will put all his hopes up for a small miracle to happen, but he is such a fragile being. Still, with an opportunity like this, he decided to go through in supporting this wounded lizard. A few moments later, the group of lizardmen continued to roam this barren land. Exhaustion was noticeable within their expressions. Fortunately for them, they have somehow encountered a wounded gazelle on their path, which they didn't hesitate to charge towards. And because it had been a long time since they saw meat, they act like savages and consumed the gazelle in frenzy, while the wounded and the elderly just sit on the side as this happened. In just a moment more, the once lively gazelle vanished in an instant. All that was remained from it were its bones. But still, the healthy lizardman was planning on consuming this until the very end, as the bone marrow on these bones is also very delicious. However, before they could do that, another one of their kind, Chaul, snatched the bones and told them that they already have enough, and they should leave these remains to those who can't hunt. Even though it was just mere bones, the injured and elderly was thankful of it, and they don't even blame the others, as they fully understand their circumstances. But unlike the weak lizards, the healthy ones question Jael if this was really the right decision. They aren't bothered if they give the leftovers to the old or young. But that guy, it was evident that he's going to die soon. The wound is already rotting. It's even a miracle that he was still alive, because with the state he was in now, he should have died already. They don't even know how he keeps up without falling behind. But even with this fact, Jael's belief remained the same. This wasn't just out of sympathy, but because the wounded lizardman named Rakrak was the only one who had faced a saber-toothed tiger when everyone else turned their backs and ran away. Thanks to Rakrak, there was no other damage to the group other than his wounds. If it wasn't for Rakrak, many would have died or gotten injured, and in the worst-case scenario, the whole group could have fallen apart. And of course, the others understood this, and appreciated what Rakrak has done, but the fact still remains that he is going to die soon, and there's not enough food to share with. To which Jarl exclaimed to them that they are being shameless, ungrateful son of a blizzard, but they don't seem to mind her remarks as they care more about logical reasoning. Still, even with such arguments, they decided to go with Jael's reasoning, as it can be seen that Rakrak was still in the group. However, with the group lying near with each other, Rakrak just lay on the corner all alone, and because of his injuries, it made it hard for him to sleep comfortably. However, this also allowed him to immediately notice the blue butterfly just flying around above him, and looking at it with curiosity, it led him to see the top of a hill, illuminated with a shining light, and with nothing else to do, Rakrak had stood up and followed the strange light, and seeing him walk in the middle of the night, made others assume that he is finally leaving the group. Still, it was his own decision to do this, so no one stopped him, and they were just fixated on what he was about to do next, while Rakrak, on the other hand, was grasping on the last purpose he had left in this cruel life of his, and that is to follow what seemed to be a glimpse of hope. But as he ascended, he was wondering if this was just a deranged fantasy of his, and the fact that he was the only one who reacted to seeing it. It might really be the case, And even if what he is seeing right now means something, he wonders what on earth would that be and where it would lead him to. But he doesn't have to wonder for long. As soon as he arrived at the top of the hill, his eyes widened with surprise as a hill of beetles just erected like a tower. It was enough for the entire group to satiate their hunger. With this, a system message appeared in front of Nebula, notifying him that the lizardmen recognized this event to be a miracle, which he was relieved to see, and seeing that other lizardmen enjoyed his gift. The next step is to make them realize this miracle was done by him, and let them know his name, his divinity. To his surprise, it seems like he doesn't have to, since Rakrak decided to announce the miracle himself, which was understandable, as individuals with high willpower tend to take care of things on their own. Unexpectedly, with the beetle on Rakrak's hand, they decided to recognize his divinity as the nameless beetle god, which surprised him, as he had expected them to name it Butterfly at the least, since he had used butterflies to guide them for all this time. But Beetle God is still fine, and he understood that no one has a great name from the beginning, so he lets it be. And as he looks over them, Nebula couldn't contain his smile, because he acknowledges that Rakrak will be important to him. Of course, that goes for Rakrak as well. The next day arrived, Rakrak had seen butterflies again. Still, he contemplated to following it again, while his lizard kind, on the other hand, was excited to know he is seeing butterflies, as this was a sign that they were going to have a full stomach. However, this time, he was hesitant to chase his fantasy right away. Until now, they were in great debt to the swarms of beetles. However, the beetles could be leading them to a trap if one looked at the matter from another perspective, especially when winter is coming soon, and beetles would appear from the cold directions on the north. So if they head in the direction where the beetles came, they will surely freeze to death. And hearing his reasonings, this made the others immediately change their mind on feasting on beetles, and just go to a different direction. But even though this was the logical solution, Rakrak felt that they shouldn't do that, because there is nothing in the opposite direction as well. However, he also admits that he doesn't have a clue on what purpose is there in the fantasy he was seeing, but for now, he just doesn't have any other choice but to follow. Meanwhile, Nebula saw everything and noticed that they are losing faith. Still, he understood that it's just the beginning, so it was reasonable for them to lack faith, and there is nothing he could do. But if he were to be specific, he would rather hear a logical leader than a leader who is blinded by faith. However, if Rakrak would continue believing in him, he is sure to make Rakrak experience a future that he could never imagine. And just as Nebula wanted, Rakrak's tribe walked through the path he had paved, and they then began to climb a small hill that rose past the wilderness. And as they climbed the hill, their eyes began to widen as they couldn't believe what was in front of them. And seeing that everyone was too stunned to say anything, Rakrak turned towards the group and proclaimed that the nameless beetle god has yet again gave them another miracle, as he brought them to a sanctuary where thick bushes and trees circled the wide spring, from which small waterfalls and streams flowed. With this, everyone cheered with joy from the top of their lungs, celebrating the glimpse of hope of survival that was given to them by believing in Rakrak's decision. At the same time, Nebula's divinity level increased to level 2, and his level of small area has also increased to 2. With this, Blessings of Bug's ability is now available, and this was such an important skill to have because in the game The Lost World, it was possible to grant a special ability to the believers who supported the small area once the player's small area leveled up. This was called God's Blessing, and it allows the believers to evolve, as the blessings would change the appearance of the species, and the change would be passed down to the descendants. And if his hunch were right, Rakrak would know for sure what he wanted. And so Nebula decided to bless Rakrak and him as priest, in order to deliver his will to his people. A few moments later, the day turned into night. The lizardmen sleep peacefully under the clear night sky. And because Rakrak was now a priest, Nebula is now able to get inside his dreams and show himself to him, but with a more familiar persona akin to Rakrak's species. And for this, Rakrak had so much things to ask, but before he could say anything, Nebula just stretched out his arm, like he was asking Rakrak to hold it. But as Nebula expected, Rakrak was insightful. He knew exactly that it wasn't what he wanted, so Rakrak remained still, prompting Nebula to shift his outstretched arm to point at something below. To Rakrak's surprise, he was now holding a buffalo's skull, and somehow, he then lifted it up like he had been doing this for countless of times, and placed it on the nameless beetle god's head. With this, the image of their god became clear to him, and so as soon as the day arrived, he gathered everyone, and with every detail he told them what exactly he had dreamed of. And in hearing this, the more insightful lizardman had deduced that the message of the beetle god he had seen in his dreams was clear, and that he is asking for them to sacrifice a buffalo. However, to hunt a buffalo, they have to go deep into the wilderness, which is just too big of a risk for jail. However, the others had different opinion of what she just said, as they believe they have a duty to fulfill since the one who brought them to the sanctuary had personally asked for it. But even with this reasoning, Jael's decision remained the same, as she just doesn't want to put their pack in danger, which they understand where she is coming from. And so they suggested that perhaps all pack of hunters should step forward and join the hunt, to which Jael immediately disagreed, as it was a stupid suggestion, because if they do just that, who will be left to protect the others who are weakened? This argument left the others unable to think of any alternative ways, and so it seems like they were in a predicament. But to their surprise, Rakrak also agreed to Jael's concern. He was a great leader. He isn't willing to put the whole pack in danger as well, so he suggested that he will go alone. This instantly surprised everyone. Even Jael couldn't stand what Rakrak had just suggested, because they know for a fact that it is near impossible to catch a buffalo alone. Seeing them worried like this, Rakrak clarified that he decided this not because he was being reckless, but because God had given him a blessing. This initially confused Jael, and so Rakrak enlightened them about what he just said, explaining to them about how he encountered another unbelievable miracle. When he woke up, his wound has completely healed, and his shoulders were all covered with black scales, just like a beetle. And seeing this with their own eyes, Jael admits that what happened to him is a bit strange. However, this isn't enough of a reason to go hunting buffalo alone, which Rakrak agreed as well, because the real reason is the massive strength he now acquired. To demonstrate this, he hurled a spear to a tree, and penetrated hard enough for it to shatter within contact. This display instantly left all the lizardmen in shock and in disbelief. The impact was so forceful that all that remained on the tree was its bark, leaving the lizardmen in awe. With this, they eagerly inquired if Rakrak had been concealing this extraordinary power. Even though it was a lifeless tree, the showcased strength exceeded their capabilities. So it became apparent that the Rakrak they thought they knew really had undergone a remarkable transformation. But as they marveled at Rakrak's newfound skill, on the horizon, their intended prey emerged and sprinted toward them. Rakrak, seizing the opportunity, announced it with enthusiasm, leaving the lizardmen in shock, as they couldn't believe such coincidence to happen, because a herd of buffalo always moves to the same place. It makes no sense to get lost and come all the way here, but now, it seems like their previous argument was pointless after all, because their god really wanted that offering. And so without a moment's hesitation, Rakrak charged to the herd of buffalo and skillfully hurled his spear into the midst of the group. Striking with precision, the first buffalo, once feared by the lizardmen, fell before their eyes. This boosted the lizardmen's morale, and so they eagerly joined Rakrak in a unified attack on the buffalo. A few moments later, the day turned into night once again. But now, with the countless buffalo slain, they had managed to create an altar with bones, and in the top of it was a whole buffalo ready to be offered to the nameless beetle god. And with Rakrak's glib tongue, he uttered the right words to consecrate the offering, and others followed suit. And although it is a sloppy and clumsy ritual for Nebula's eyes, the sincerity behind it was what mattered. So Nebula was able to gain faith beyond his expectations. It was a decent rite, as a novice priest, and now that Nebula thinks of the time he put into it, it was worth doing this much. He couldn't control the buffalo, as he wasn't the god of wild grass that a buffalo eats, so it took him time and effort from other friends of his. The grasshopper, he set them up as a trap, and so as soon as the buffalo got to eat it, he had managed to control it somehow. However, it seems like the lizard ate the baby buffalo as well. Still, this was reasonable, because at this stage, it is difficult to expect they already have knowledge and skills equivalent to herding, but still their ignorance was too much. So it seems like the lizardmen are still savages, and the population support of this oasis is not very high. At most, the limit will be a few years, so in their current state, with their primitive ass, who doesn't know anything about farming or ranching, it is bound that they will face difficulty to get through a calamity. However, even if he realized this, he understood that it is still very difficult to realize certain knowledge on your own. And it's not okay to say it directly either, because it violates the law of causality. But it's not that there is no way, it will just take some time. So if that's the case, then first thing he has to do is starting by giving a blessing. With this, another light shined towards Rakrak. A few days had passed. The altar they had previously built had grew larger as they have hunted more buffaloes. But what's even more surprising was the significant change Rakrak had gone through. Because of the blessing that Nebula gave, Rakrak and his men had evolved and had now black scales like the beetle they had consumed. But even with this, Rakrak was troubled, as he had a disturbing dream in previous night, and he doesn't know what it meant, as the vision was ambiguous, where the altar, once a symbol of prosperity, now shook precariously in the unsettling dream. The pond of blessings, which had protected them for many years, had lost its vitality. No more fish thrived in its once teeming waters, and the ground had become so parched that no root plants could be found, which seems to be a dire dream. However, Jael pointed out that it will be a long time before that happens, indicating that he shouldn't worry that much, especially because the god takes care of them, which Rakrak agreed, as believe in God too, more than anyone else. But the god's will often come across as difficult for them to understand, so if the leader is lacking in understanding its meaning, there will come a time that they will betray God's will, and he is afraid of that happening, and so he ponders hard on what his vision had shown him and find out the meaning of it. To his surprise, he doesn't have to wonder for long, as he saw a large group emerging from the horizon. With this, they now know why the altar shook. It was to warn them about the arrival of their enemy, and looking at them closely, there was no doubt that these guys are the ones who kicked them out, and this was obvious as the leader had blue scale like them from before, and above all, the large monster that only the leader could tame was with them, solidifying their recognition. And looking at the numbers, it looks like the entire tribe has arrived. That could mean that their hometown, a wetland with green leather, was completely devastated. This really grinded Rakrak's gear, and the only possible explanation Jael could come up with was that the large monster was high maintenance, that it depleted their resources at a much faster rate. Nonetheless, they were confident that they will not be able to locate their sanctuary, since it is located on terrain that cannot be seen until you climb up, so there is a possibility that they may pass by without knowing. However, this didn't go as they had hoped for, as the ones who were in patrol, led by Ur, exposed their presence by boldly shouted at the approaching tribe to stop their advances, as this was the sanctuary of the nameless beetle avatar, so they better not take a single step in their turf. However, this only fueled curiosity on the other side. Even Rakrak couldn't believe the stupidity of Ur's. Still, he told Jael not to worry, since this may also be God's arrangement, which confused Jo, so she asked what he meant by that. In response, Rakrak explained that he believed that God deliberately caused this situation. This led Jael to assume he meant it was a test from God, but Rakrak clarified that it might not be a test, but rather a mission to accept and save those who were once part of their community. But even if that were the case, Jael remained concerned, since they know all too well that the leader of their previous tribe is just ruthless. He didn't even think twice to drive out the weak tribe into the wilderness, so changing the leader's mind is just impossible. However, as they ponder this, the blue butterfly appeared in front of Rakrak once more, a clear sign of God's will. With this, he realizes that it was foolish for them to dare to think beyond their scope, as they don't have the ability to see the future, and speculating here about what will happen wouldn't get them anywhere. So the only thing they can do right now is to do what they can, and that is to face their adversaries. Meanwhile, Nebula was delighted to see that Rakrak understood exactly what he meant. Rakrak's tribe and the Blue-Hide tribe must be united for population growth and technological advancement. But what's a bit strange is that Rakrak made that decision on his own. This led Nebula to believe that this was because of Rakrak's high willpower, and a leader with high self-will is a good thing for Nebula. And the only thing he wished now is if only he could instill a firm belief. With this, he would be allowed to control everything individually, and he will be able to express his intentions more efficiently. However, Nebula acknowledged that such developments would take time and a higher level of influence. For now, he resolved to concentrate on the impending battle, and just as expected, the cunning leader of the Blue Lizardmen had decided to use his sly mouth to get more information out of the stupid lizardmen, and with every mock, Ur's group revealed more and more information about their place, and when the leader was just about to think he got the best of them, someone he didn't expect arrived and answered his domineering question, but with a more confidence and conviction. Rakrak had also revealed that their place had an avatar. Rakrak's demeanor exuded that of a leader, and so the blue leader had withdrawn his mocking voice, and asked seriously what Rakrak meant by an avatar, prompting Rakrak to explain that this place is the domain of the nameless beetle avatar. However, the blue guy doesn't believe in such thing, and with this, he discerned that the leader in front of him is just delusional like the others, and so he regained back his domineering tone and looked down on Rakrak's tribe once more, and then with exuding audacity, he demanded that they leave, assuring them that if they departed immediately, he wouldn't launch an attack. The disdainful attitude even extended to the mount, looking at them as if they were trash, and if that wasn't menacing enough, he confidently asserted that they stood no chance against him, boasting of his countless followers, and according to him, if Rakrak were truly a leader, he should have already calculated by now the undeniable truth of his words. To the blue leader's surprise, Rakrak merely shook his head and aimed his spear against the blue guy, indicating that he is willing to fight off guard. But even before he could say anything, Rakrak turned his attention to those who followed the blue leader, attempted to negotiate with them. He extended an invitation for them to join Rakrak's tribe, promising that under God's protection, they would be cared for according to his will. However, definitely, this only made the blue leader laugh hysterically. What Rakrak was spouting was all bullshit, so it seems like there was no point in them talking, as they were all foolish in the blue guy's eyes. But Rakrak said no, you don't know God, and now look at this spear. It's sharp, which taken aback the blue leader, because the spear was indeed sharp. But what concerned the blue guy more is that this Rakrak just kept talking nonsense. He definitely crazy, and so he decided to attack this foolish lizard. And as the blue guy attacked, Rakrak prayed to his god to give him courage and strength to defeat the enemy in front of him. However, to his dismay, his god responded, "Psych, you thought," as the spear that he was holding just shattered on impact. With this, he knew it was all over, and so he freezed up. However, before this happened, a system interface popped up in front of Nebula. Since two different tribes came into contact, experience points for both tribes increased significantly. Subsequently, this triggered another system interface to pop up, and since he had been paying a lot of attention to one tribe, these tribes are now part of his territory. With this, another skill was available for Nebula to use, which he didn't think twice to use because of his current circumstance. With this, before the large monster's attack could land, a beam of bright light suddenly fell directly on Rakrak. With this, he was able to dodge the upcoming attack, as he was now exuding a great amount of mana, since he is now one with Nebula, as he had took over his consciousness. Meanwhile, the blue guy doesn't have a single clue on what happened. Still, he tries to attack Rakrak once more, but Nebula, who is in Rakrak's body, just looked at his attempt with an indifferent expression, and their movement was just so slow to him. And so Nebula got time to open the blue guy's status window to see his strength. To Nebula's surprise, Rakrak alone could manage to defeat this fool, so it seemed like the only reason he was losing was because of the little dragon monster, as it had 87 strength beyond what Rakrak has. But with the blessing, it's not difficult anymore, and so Nebula dashed towards the Drake, which caught the Drake of guard of how fast he was. This was possible because the skill Strong Avatar gives the user an additional stat called Divinity. One divinity equals 200 times the maximum value of power that can exist naturally. To put it simply, the power of Rakrak now is 630, and so Nebula easily slapped the Drake's face into the ground, flipping them like they were pancakes. This shocked everyone, as they couldn't even believe it was possible. This overwhelming difference in power was just out of this world. Even Rakrak's own tribesmen, who was used to Rakrak's strength, was in shock, and so silence followed, as they were all too stunned to say anything. But now that the threat was gone, Rakrak's men was about to celebrate. However, it seems like Rakrak remained indifferent, so they halted their celebration. Meanwhile, the blue guy was in disbelief himself. He can't grasp the fact that he was defeated. His calculations were never wrong, and the only conclusion he could make was that Rakrak had pulled a trick from his ass. And so he attempted another attack on Rakrak, but little did he know, Nebula was still in control of Rakrak's body, and Nebula doesn't give a shit. So he clapped the blue guy so hard that his head was now facing the other way around, killing him on the spot. After that display, with a cold tone, he asks the others if they would also like to try his hands. But who in the right mind would do that? And so they let go of their weapons and swear allegiance to Rakrak and his tribe. And seeing that they have completely submitted, Nebula leave Rakrak's body, and therefore Rakrak regain his consciousness. Still, he knew it happened and can't believe that it did just happen. The Avatar just come in his body, and he felt he was dreaming. A few moments later, the day turned into night once more, but the paradise they lived was livelier than before, as the countless of lizard men had gained their numbers, and amidst of it, same conversation can be heard. The new lizard men couldn't believe that what in front of them is the same tribe who went out into the wilderness, as they now have a different color, prompting them to explain that it was because they are following the nameless beetle avatar. That's why they changed and became stronger. If this didn't happen, they would have died wandering in the wilderness. With this story, the new tribe folks now know the strength of the Avatar. Even their leader's strength was out of this world. As this happened, Rakrak was just sitting with YUGIOH contemplating about something. But his trains of thought was disrupted by YUGIOH asking him if their current predicament was okay, because with him accepting the others, their population was increased sixfold. With this, the place they are staying at, which he knows all too well. He was thinking so hard in silence, but the only option he could think now was that they have to leave this place, which surprised YUGIOH, as they couldn't just wander around the wilderness without any answers, to which Rakrak responded that it wasn't the case, because he feels it, the answers will definitely lie within them. The answers sent by God through their old brothers. The next day had arrived. Rakrak's tribesmen is trying to tame the little Drake monster. However, it seems like they were having a hard time at it. They even tried to convince it by telling that its master is dead, so it should just submit. But expectedly, with this foolishness of theirs, the drake whipped its tail to return, almost hitting one of the lizard dude. And initially they stood their ground, but it quickly became clear that the drake was not taking them seriously, as it tried to be cheeky and launched itself to them. Luckily for them, the beast was tied to a tree. Still, they knew that if they prolong this further, the beast will just get away. And for that, they loudly asked it if it really wanted to get scolded, because they will do just that if it keeps this up. However, the situation shifted dramatically with Rakrak's arrival. The drake, vividly recalling Rakrak's previous actions, instinctively retreated. Contrary to its expectations, Rakrak approached with a calm demeanor, offering the drake something. Even the drake was shocked to see the guy who can just kill it in an instant would be this gentle. And so little by little the drake accepted Rakrak's offer. Even the others were in shock to see the fierce drake to immediately change to a more domesticated stance. It has even extended its head for Rakrak to pat as if it was asking for more. With this, Rakrak gave it more as a reward for being well behaved, which the creature accepted without hesitation. And this gesture of Rakrak stemmed from a belief that there must be a significant reason for the god to spare the drake's life. And with this, the drake looked at Rakrak in a different light, and was now comfortable with Rakrak that it even tried to ask for more. And seeing this change, Rakrak playfully teased to give more. But unfortunately, he revealed that he couldn't, because if he did just that, their food supply will deplete, leaving them with nothing left to eat. And if it really wants them to be together in the future, it needs to be patient. Surprisingly, the little drake named Mon had understood Rakrak's policy, and so it just lie and wait for another treat to come. With this, Rakrak's job here was done, and so he prepared to depart. However, before leaving, he turned to his subordinates with a final instruction. He emphasized that if Manun caused any further trouble, they were to inform him without delay, which they understood. Then, a few moments had passed. Rakrak was now meeting with his other tribesmen, and he is inspecting a well-crafted blade made by one of them, which impressed him, so it led him to ask the guy if he is able to replicate this quality again, to which he proudly claims that he can, every time for that matter. And if it weren't for their previous leaders' stubbornness, he would have made better blades a long time ago. This piqued Rakrak's interest, and so he asks the man the reason why their leader opposed to making such a well-crafted item. In response, the man explained that it was because of the trees. In the process of making this blade, they have to use a lot of wood. Rakrak initially clueless about crafting weapons. He asks if this was made under the heat of a bonfire, to which the man clarified that it isn't, and that they have to burn the wood first to make the special fuel needed to make these things. With that clarified, Rakrak now knows that making these weapons are costly. Still, he isn't willing to be like the previous leader, who was afraid of change and just outright refuse a great opportunity for their tribe. So he told the man who was full of scars to wait tomorrow, as he needed to further think of this before making a decision, which the man understood quite well, and so he left in silence. After that, a lizard with a single arm comes in, and it seems like he was here since he heard Rakrak is looking for a guide. Without a doubt, on Rakrak's mind, he must be a wanderer, to which the guy confirmed, and he had been wandering from quite some time, hopping from place to place in the hopes of finding a place that he could call home. And because of this, he learned to see the way, a path that leads to a land that won't let them go hungry. He have a few places in mind. However, he can't guarantee whether it will still be the same. This intrigued Rakrak, so he asked if other tribesmen and wanderers can be located in there as well, to which the guy confirmed. So if that's the case, there is no reason for them not to go there, and if the inhabitants of that place are against them, all they have to do is defeat them and take over the lands, which the guy agreed that it is a sound decision, and if that's his will, he should follow it without hesitation. Now that was settled, Rakrak asked the guy, how can he give him faith in his abilities? Which shocked the guy, as this was the first time a leader took interest in learning his ability. In turn, he immediately pointed up above, and told them that his answer always come from them, which Rakrak initially thought the guy was talking about the sky, which the guy corrected, that it's not just the sky, but a sky full of stars. And with that, they waited for a few hours to pass, so that the wanderer could explain in detail what he meant. And as night fell, Rakrak looked up at the stars, and because this was his first time intently observing them, his curiosity piqued, leading him to ask the wanderer if the stars were moving, to which the wanderer responded that it could be possible, but he isn't entirely sure, as he hadn't fully grasped the rules governing the skies above them. But he had set some rules that he must follow, because if one knows the path of the stars to take, one could follow the path of man without being confused. And since Rakrak doesn't know how to do that just yet, Wanderer will tell him the way of the stars this instant, and if they practice this for a few days, he will gain faith in this ability. With that, the Wanderer began to impart his knowledge about the vast universe surrounding them, and and after spending some time in this enlightening exchange, the wanderer concluded his lesson for the day and planned to continue it the next day at the same time. However, Rakrak's duty as a leader was not finished, because Yor, the dude who was assigned to take care of the Drake, had appeared. And so, Rakrak instantly inquired if he is here because Manun is causing trouble again, to which Yor clarified that it wasn't the case, because even though Manun seems a little dissatisfied, since he has been giving him meals on time, he became more gentle. This was such a great news for Rakrak, as he had one less thing to take care of. However, the guy wasn't here to report just that. He was here to suggest an idea. As he had heard Jael said, they need a way to move around without starving. So when he watched him tame Manun with snacks, he suddenly thought of something. If it was possible to tame Manun, it is also possible that they could tame something else. This intrigued Rakrak once more, and so he asks the guy to broaden his explanation and give example, leading him to point it far below, onto the herd of buffalo. And with this, a system interface had popped up, notifying Nebula that Rakrak's tribe had just learned the ability to herd. This made Nebula think about history, and it is said that in human history, splits into two branches at some point. One to do farming, the other is to do pastoralism. Although the source of this information is from the game, he believes that it is illogical to go with this notion, as this reality was from the game he played. But now that it comes into mind, he believes that farming would be more stable. In fact, major civilizations also started with this, but the tribe he chose was the lizardmen, with a strong physique and high environmental adaptability. So what they need more is to be a pastoral society rather than farming. And in this pack, the technology that will give them wings is ironware. Luckily, Rakrak had already approved using tons of wood for the smithy to get into motion, and coupled with the guy's technique, which he crafted for many years, it was just a matter of time and effort that they finally made batches of well-sharpened blades, which Nebula was glad to see. For now, it may be softer than well-processed bronzeware, but for Rakrak's tribe who had no choice but to use stone tools, it will be a great help. Also, he had another unexpected gain. This guy, Wanderer, and his knowledge of astronomy. Of course, it is still too primitive to be called astronomy, but in the distant future, he hoped that they put it into good use. And with that, the Wanderer taught Rakrak more about the stars that they didn't even notice how much time had passed. But because of it, Rakrak had more of an idea of what the stars hold, and he was engrossed with this knowledge that he can't look away and just continue to stare above. But now that his men had gave him so much, it was time for him to do what he can as the leader of the tribe. With this in mind, he had gathered his tribesmen in the center of the sanctuary and give a speech about their current circumstance, and that it has been a long time since God brought them to this land. They even met their brothers again, but they could have kicked them like what they did to them. They could have chosen to live on their own. Then they could have lived for a longer time in this land.
What did he say?
But of course, those who were kicked out would have died in the wilderness, and that was wrong, because their God wanted salvation, not exclusion. That is because it benefits more people. This speech of his had moved the hearts of the people, and seeing this effect, Rakrak took this opportunity to tell them what they must do, and that is to leave this place by dawn. This in turn shocked the people, but Rakrak told them not to worry, because they are not going to wander aimlessly like last time, because they have Stargazer. This man has been telling him the movements of the stars for several days, and he had confirmed that what this person said was true, and so he was proud to announce that this man, which he now calls Stargazer, will be their guide. From now on, they will entrust the Stargazer to guide their path. But Rakrak knew that his words would not be enough to convince all of his people, and so he asks Stargazer to explain and demonstrate to everyone where he will be leading them, which Stargazer didn't hesitate to do just that, telling them that after dawn, when the morning sun rises, they will head to the right side of the sun, and they will keep walking for 10 days straight, then another 15 days to the right again along a rotten lake, and 3 days more on a desolate mountain paths and valley paths. After walking like that, they will find their destination, where an endless forest will greet them. There will be many beasts there, and it's an area where there are packs of other races as well. This meant that it is a good area to live in. Now that was cleared up, Rakrak thanked Stargazer for the explanation, and then continued his speech by climbing the altar to make a statement. And now that all their attention was on him, he asked Yor loudly why he didn't eat any water buffalo they caught yesterday. And this was so sudden that Yor was so caught off guard that he doesn't know how to respond. But seeing Rakrak just stand there on the altar, menacingly, he knew that he should take this question as serious as possible. And if he lied right now, it would be the end of him. And so even though he was nervous, he used his trembling voice to answer Rakrak's inquiry as truthful as possible, explaining why he didn't eat a boar yesterday was because he wasn't hungry, leading Rakrak to point out that everyone worked hard to catch that water buffalo, and yet he didn't eat any, which in turn made Yor more nervous from before. But he knew that if he doesn't say anything now, the others will think that he did this to disrespect them, and so he gathered all his courage to clarify that he acknowledged that everyone worked hard, but he just wasn't particularly hungry. And he was thinking that if he holds back now, then maybe later he could eat it when he is really hungry. And this is just what Ragrak wanted to hear, and so he praised you for a job well done. This in turn shocked everyone. Even Yor couldn't comprehend what just happened. He thought he was getting grilled, but it turns out he was doing good. And seeing their confused faces, Ragrak explained why he just complimented him, and that he appreciated his action because he was thinking of the future. And this was an excellent mindset to have, so he asks Yor again if this will continue to be the case, which Yor gladly responded that it is. And as long as he doesn't starve, he would continue to do that. And with that, Ragrak decided to compensate him with the spear they just made, shocking everyone yet again. But even before they could respond, the spear was immediately handed to Yor, which in turn made his eyes widen with awe as the spear shines, a testament of how well crafted it was. But another revelation had surprised them yet again, because those who followed Yor's words, and those who resisted their desire to eat what they wanted, were also worthy to be given a spear. This really made the group happy, and looking at how awesome they looked with the spear, the others were starting to contemplate on following what Yor had just done. While Jayol, on the other hand, was relieved to see that this was what Ragrak decided, setting an example for their people to follow. But to her surprise, Ragrak wasn't done, as he then took a skull from the altar to wear it, and asks for Yor and his men to come forward one by one, as he was about to have a knighting ceremony for them to officially be the warrior of their tribe. And with that, Yor, the Bone Warrior, had been born, and this is the god's will. So Ragrak told him that he should stand proud, which he was, seeing that he can't even contain his tears from coming out. A few moments later, the dawn had arrived, and since they were all set and ready, Ragrak announced for them to depart this holy place, and he assured them not to worry, since their god's will is with them. That's why they are not bound to a place anymore. And so everyone should carve the nameless beetle god into their heads. And remember that even though their path will be full of challenges, they have to move forward without fear, just as they endured the desire to eat the water buffalo. If they endure and move forward, they will prosper, and it will benefit everyone. And they shouldn't worry because their God will always be with them. And with Ragrak's speech, everyone's heart was moved, and so they were more eager to leave this place with hope of a promised land ahead. Meanwhile, Ragrak just took a deep breath, as he asked his god to forgive him for using his name to convince his people to leave this place. But Nebula believes that there was no need for him to apologize, as he understood very well his intentions, and if Ragrak didn't do that, he wouldn't have chosen him as a priest in the first place. Rather, he was more than glad of what Ragrak had done, as he even achieved the growth of another entity, leveling your attributes significantly. And also even Ragrak's special abilities finally saw light, as it further improved in one night. And with how Ragrak have done well so far and have not disappointed his expectations, Nebula was convinced that from now on, Ragrak will be a full-fledged start for his godhood. A few days later, the group was still traversing the wilderness, but because of the heat, Manun collapsed on the spot, so Ragrak immediately went to check up on it. But it seemed like Manun just exhausted itself, so he asked Stargazer if it was possible for them to take a rest, which Stargazer approved since it can't be helped. With this, he signaled to everyone to take a short break, which the warriors pass on the message to others. But as they rest, Ragrak overheard countless of concerns from his tribesmen, one such doubting if they could even go to the promised place he so proclaimed. They even doubt if taking a rest would gain back their strength, as they were all exhausted, and they even barely ate anything, making things much worse. But Ragrak understood all of this, since they have been in the wilderness for 3 days now, and because of it, the whole group is very tired, and they are running out of food. With such circumstance, they can only hope for another miracle to happen. But it seems like he doesn't have to wait for long, as one of his warriors hurriedly approached him to notify him that a flock had appeared ahead of them. They are scaleless bastards. The scaleless bastards they were talking about is a group of steamy orcs, and is now excitedly rushing towards the lizard man that they saw, as they plan to take their resources and get out of this horrible place as quickly as possible. And they were confident in defeating those lizards, as they believe that their species is more powerful in terms of strength. But to their surprise, these lizards aren't your average day-to-day lizards, and they even have the whole crew with them. With this, they instantly knew they messed up, and so they just froze in fear. And observing their reaction, Ragrak couldn't help but teasingly mock their foolishness, likening them to moths blindly drawn to a flame, unaware of the danger they were courting. However, they were too stunned to even respond, and looking at their units, it seemed like these lizards are more well-equipped than they were. With this, the orc leader immediately lowered his weapon and bowed his head, and ask Rakrak for forgiveness, and explain that they did not mean to make such a big fuss. They were just in a hurry as they wanted to get out of the canyon as quickly as possible. This confused Rakrak, because as he had observed the hillside, there didn't seem to be a problem, and according to Stargazer, the canyon they were in now would take 3 days for them to traverse. But as they had endured everything until now, they would surely be able to endure another 3 days. In addition, as the environment changed, edible things began to appear here and there, so he couldn't understand why they want to leave that hill as quickly as possible. In turn, he asked the orcs to explain further, which the orc lord didn't hesitate to do just that, explaining to them that they wouldn't even think of leaving their home, but they were left with no choice, and so they ran away, and it was because a monster had appeared. This surprised Rakrak's group, and if the group of orcs were guilty of something, they would have to make up for it. But Rakrak thought that was unnecessary, and following the rules of the wilderness, Jael recommended taking away what the orcs had, but Rakrak didn't do so. Instead, just as Jael gave Rakrak food, and Rakrak gave Manun food, he gave some food to the orcs as well, which the orc leader hadn't expected to be welcomed, and so he bowed down so far that his head touched the ground, while Rakrak left the orc to do as he pleased. But he emphasized that it wasn't given for nothing, so he asked the orc to tell him more about the monster, which he gladly will, and tell him in exact details. The group of orcs had lived close by. They weren't able to go deeper into the mountains, as there were stronger species, and especially carnivores there. However, compared to the wilderness, it was easy to find food in this area, so it wasn't much of a problem for a group of 30 orcs. But one day, the monster appeared. The monster apparently had a hard upper body, and seemed to crawl on the ground like an insect with many legs, and it was over 20 meters long. Meanwhile, Nebula recognized exactly what it was once he heard the description. It's no doubt an abomination. The plot of the game, The Lost World, was that old gods had left the planet. However, the gods were the only ones who had disappeared, and the numerous species and creatures that served the gods remained. Among them was the abomination. Simply put, it was like a giant boss monster that appeared on the field, and whoever took the risk and hunted it would get a corresponding award. The problem is that it's tricky to deal with for a low-level civilization, and the reason why he was sure of it was simple. The abomination was a creation of the gods. Therefore, divinity modifiers existed for its skills. This meant that its skills are going to be incredible. It won't be that high, because it's out in the field, as opposed to inside a dungeon. But considering its basic skills and special abilities, it will be stronger than Rakrak with plus D3. And if they had an equal fight, Rakrak would likely be injured. And even if he didn't, the rest of the warriors would suffer injuries. With this, Nebula was considering if he should give them a hint to take a detour. However, it wasn't quite a good idea to do that either, because Rakrak's clan and the herd of buffaloes were all losing energy. But to Nebula's surprise, Rarik proved himself again why he was chosen by him, as if Rakrak had a similar thought to him. Rakrak called out Stargazer and asked him if there is a way they can go around, to which Stargazer responded that there are, but they would have to go back to the wilderness and walk around the mountain for 8 days. Instantly, Rakrak shook his head as if he didn't like what he heard. So it seems like they can't run away without even seeing what their opponent is like. But as they had feared, it was undoubtedly strong. It was about 15 meters long, which was smaller than what the orc had described. But it was in no way small. The body was elongated and covered by a hard outer shell. It even had a pair of venomous fangs. Hanging from the top of the outer skin was a half-destroyed stone structure which signified that the ancient people had served this creature. The moss that covered the structure gave away how old the creature was, and its divinity level was at 3. And since its basic strength was 120, it would still be stronger than Rakrak, even if divine control was used. And even though Rakrak's group couldn't see the creature's stats, they seemed intimidated by the ancient Coleoptera as it twisted its body under the valley. And it didn't help that its mere movements shake the ground, and it even revealed to them by the Orc Lord that turbulence was caused by the creature just moving in its sleep. With this, you're asked Rakrak if they should run away. However, Rakrak knows all too well that it would be costly. With this, Rakrak was not sure on what to do next. But as they were waiting for Rakrak to decide, Joel was inspecting her surroundings, and noticed the huge boulder just sitting on the edge of the hill. And so she immediately approached Rakrak and told him that they must fight, because they have the advantage. This led Nebula to take interest in Jael's opinion, and so he briefly took a look at her stats, revealing to him that she has the Arbiter class. This meant that one is trusted by the clan, which he already knew, but her intelligence level is higher than Rakrak's, and it keeps on rising. But the most interesting thing is her special ability, Intuition. It was a special ability that hadn't popped up until recently. It was perhaps newly created due to recent experiences. With this, Nebula waited for Jael's next words. To his surprise, Jael talked about what the Iron Craftsman did to heat the iron. Until now, they have been blowing air with their mouths, waving their hands, or ripping large pieces of bark and fanning them. However, the iron craftsman seems to use a different method, a special tool called bellows. It was able to blow much more wind and was more convenient. And with just this, Rakrak get what Jael's trying to convey, and that by using tools, less power can be used to project more power. But the problem was, they do not have a tool like bellows. Also, that tool was made by the craftsman, after he thought about it for a long time. In response, Jael clarified that they won't need such a sophisticated tool. A simple tool will be more than enough, as the monster they need to deal with is sleeping at the bottom of that hillside, and they are at a much higher elevation. They are no different than a craftsman sitting in front of a forge. So if they just prepare and act accordingly, they will be able to heat the metal. These words alone didn't make sense to Rakrak or the rest of the warriors, but Jael proceeded to tell them a specific idea she had in mind. Rakrak and the warriors nodded and took it well. That was also true for Nebula, so he used a miracle to summon a blue butterfly in front of Rakrak, which the warriors wondered what was happening as a blue butterfly appeared out of season in the wilderness, while Rakrak stared blankly at the butterfly's wings, and his eyes began to shine, and then raised the corners of his mouth, as this was a sign that God has given permission. With this, he decided to go what Jael had just said, and so they immediately went to the steep and rugged hillside. At the bottom of the hillside, where the ancient Coleoptera was twisting and sleeping, there was a steep slope of about 70-degree angle. This meant that were Rakrak and his warriors to fight the ancient Coleoptera there, they wouldn't be able to easily move around due to the steep slope, and would likely come into direct contact with the ancient Coleoptera. On the other hand, the giant ancient Coleoptera had many legs, so it would be able to climb an even steeper slope. Still, it won't matter, because Rakrak will be the only one to get close to it, because according to the plan, the only time Rakrak was going to approach the ancient Coleoptera was when they were going to kill it. And with just a few moments of preparation, the warriors were now stationed beside the boulders that Rakrak had pointed to. They weren't barehanded. They found and uprooted a few tall trees in the area, and were each holding one in its entirety, to roll the boulders and crushing it to death. It was indeed a simple plan, but a plan that required imagination. Even Rakrak thought confronting and fighting it face to face was the only way. But Jael, on the other hand, thought differently. Jael didn't know exactly how to express it, but she was using her knowledge to prove with real actions that moving large things with little strength was possible. And in Nebula's eyes, her knowledge could be referred to as physics to systematize it, as she's basically applying the principles of mass and kinetic energy alongside positional energy and leverage. But that didn't mean Jael would suddenly become a physicist. However, just as the iron craftsman's skills influenced Jael's intuition, one event could influence many individuals, which is a good thing for Nebula. So he eagerly looked at their every move, and since everything was ready, the warriors immediately went into action. However, the boulders didn't move right away, and so Jael signaled to a beat, which was effective as the boulders gradually started to shake more and more, and it was not long until a boulder rolled over the ridge. But to catch a crustacean of that level, it would be better if all the rocks hit it at the same time. However, it wasn't the case, as they only managed to toss one, and that wasn't enough. It just enraged the creature, and therefore it immediately crawled up the hill to attack them. And even with its large body, this mofo was fast, and with this, Nebula knew that it was too late, and so he took over Rakrak's body with divine control. Instantly, Rakrak successfully pushed the second boulder that was about to roll over the ridge with great force. Then he proceeded to push the third boulder hard, which wasn't moving easily due to it being the largest one out of the three. Still, with Nebula inside of him, he had managed to push it to the edge. But still, Rakrak knew that the creature would not just run towards the boulder head-on, so he clasped his spear and jumped from the mountain ridge, flying 300 meters across the air, and threw the spear with all his might. With this, the spear shot through the air like a ray of light and penetrated through the ancient Coleoptera's shell. And even though it was a small wound, it was enough to restrain its movement for a moment. With this, the ancient Coleoptera received the boulder like it was on a promo, a buy one take one at that. And because the boulder directly landed on the ancient Coleoptera's head, it died in an instant. After seeing the death of the giant monster, the group roared for Rakrak, the warriors, and for the great beetle god. Meanwhile, Nebula was delighted of the outcome, but it wasn't the increased faith points that mattered. His divinity level hadn't changed as leveling up had gotten slower, and there wasn't much XP. What really mattered was the item he gained from it, the essence of abomination. When it came to being a god, their greatest power was the ability to create something. Just as Nebula was able to create enough maggots to feed the lizard men due to his small area, the insects, each god was able to create resources according to their areas by using faith points. However, to create something that doesn't exist in the world, Resources that were equally uncommon had to be used, and that would be the essence of abomination. And with this essence, it would be possible to create a creature. These creatures are faith resources generators that spread the word of God through their very existence. Also, growth is possible, and if one raises it to a higher level, it would obtain the title apostles or incarnations, and could be employed as useful strategic weapons in place of God's will. And if the creation method itself is the same as the previous game, then he would easily be able to make a creature, which in turn made him wonder what to make. However, he decided to not make one right away as it costs a lot to maintain in the beginning. And it is better to create a creature another time, even if all the necessary resources have been collected. For now, it was a priority to use faith points to help Rockrak and the group, but at least Nebula had learned that the Creature Maker program that was in the game The Lost World was also available to him now. So he left the program window open within his view. Meanwhile, Jael approached the defeated monster, curious if they could use the meat of this monster as food. She cut off the tip of the ancient Coleoptera's foot. However, the aroma of it wasn't pleasant. Still, it wasn't particularly a sign not to eat it, so she puts it into her mouth before promptly spitting it out. But she admits that the taste isn't that bad, and it's edible as well. However, it is still difficult to eat it raw. This led her to wonder if it was possible to add other ingredients, just like an edible fragrant grass, and cook it over a fire. And with a few moments later, she had cooked up a meal made from the legs of the monster, in which Rockrak consumed with caution, but as the meat touched his taste buds, he was surprised that it was edible. Although a bit bland, the aroma of it was quite nice, and seeing his reaction, Jael proudly called it cooking. She topped the meat with edible scented herbs and cooked it over fire, which Rockrak appreciated that she thought of a solution this quick, because he had been considering to throw the monster's carcass all away since the smell was so strong. But with her cooking, it seems like their list of edible food broadened, and so he prompted asking if she could also teach him how to cook, which she responded that she could. However, before that, she wants to address a concern that occupied her mind for a while, and that she saw the orc leader earlier also had a successor. And because Rockrak is a leader as well, he too needs to find a companion soon. This sudden suggestion of hers immediately froze him up, and the meat that he was eating got stuck in his throat, but he was able to swallow it due to the uniquely wide throats lizardmen were born with. Still, he was thrown off by Jael's words, as he had never cared much about finding a companion for the past few years. He was preoccupied with his concerns about God, the tribe, and surviving in general. But before he could even think of a response, Jael pointed out that he is getting old, so it is necessary for stability of the tribe. And seeing that she was serious about this, he man up and composed himself, and asked Jael if what she meant was a partner, to which she confirmed, and if he had never really think about it, then how about he consider her? But because of how sudden this all was, he wasn't sure how he should reply. Fortunately enough, something else happened that he needed to attend to. There lay the altar broken by the boulder, and inside of it, something was shining, reflecting light from the sunset. Among the fragments of the altar was a tablet made of gold. This was a surprise to Nebula, but the golden tablet that Rockrak found was a very common relic. If one was lucky enough to chance upon an ancient ruin, they could find a library of calligraphic works that was full of written language from that era. The ancient people wrote about every little thing, so it would be considered great luck if the writings they found weren't simply about building houses or other trivial matters. However, this is a decent find. Rockrak and the group didn't know what it said on the golden tablet, as they didn't know what the characters meant. But to the player, all information was revealed. The inscription on the golden tablet is an introduction to the ancient civilization that was once called the Kalanbar Empire. It largely consists of writings about the greatness of the Kalanbar Empire and its achievements, so there isn't much important information to be gleaned. Nevertheless, aside from its value as a source of information about an ancient civilization, it gives a hint about other ancient remains of the Kalanbar Empire. But civilization needs to be a lot more advanced to translate it. And because the Lost World was full of ancient civilizations, it wouldn't be necessary to reach the level of development of modern civilization on Earth, where a framework to interpret Egyptian hieroglyphics could be established based on the famous Rosetta Stone. Nevertheless, a diverse society with archaeologists, linguists, universities, and sufficient knowledge of a variety of civilizations was needed. So right now, the tablet is no different from trash. But because the golden tablet itself was a piece of very shiny metal, it attracted the attention of the lizardmen. Yor even picked it up and tried to eat it, but to his dismay, Stargazer revealed to him that he couldn't do that, since it is a metal called gold, and it is said that the color does not change or rot even after a long time. That is why they are a little more valuable. However, gold was a soft metal and would serve them no better than iron right now. It would be worth having the precious metal as decoration, but that type of art was unfamiliar to the lizard man compared to other species. With that explained, YUGIOH was still hungry, so Stargazer suggested to catch a deer. Its meat is sweet and delicious, and they have heard that the orcs had found deer track earlier, so they should go now before the night comes. And so the others decided to leave and throw the tablet and just set it aside. However, Rakrak did not intend to throw it away. It seemed that Rakrak actually liked the golden tablet, and so he told the others to go without him, while he thinks about what to do with this tablet. And he was so engrossed with it because everything dies, rots and disappear. There is nothing in the world that does not change. But this golden tablet does not rot. So Rakrak's got a feeling that those who made this tablet tried to preserve something on it, but he doesn't have a single clue where to start. And so he just stared at it for a little while. A few moments later, YUGIOH reappeared to tell him that everyone is ready for bed, but Rakrak saw this as an opportune moment to seek YUGIOH's opinion, and so he told her about what he thinks of this tablet. And seeing that she fully understood where he was getting at, Rakrak pointed out that he also noticed there are rules to the engravings, as there were shapes that are the same. This in turn made YUGIOH point out that it is similar to the hunting marks their warriors make, and just like how he is the only lizardman wearing a fur coat, which she specifically told him to wear. And that is because she wanted him to have a distinctive item that set him apart, a symbol as the tribal leader. With this, his understanding broadens, but still it was too early for him to realize what these symbols meant. And so few hours had passed, and he was still in front of the sacrificed deer, and is still looking intently at the tablet. Meanwhile, Nebula saw a slight possibility. With his support, Rakrak might be able to invent primitive letters, especially when Rakrak's willpower was high, so he was likely to continue paying attention to something that he was interested in, and so he gave it a try. But a god giving direct knowledge to their tribe would consume a great amount of faith points, but giving hints was no different from a normal miracle. And with this, Rakrak saw something strange. It seemed that the bugs were moving according to certain patterns, as if there was an invisible hand guiding them. These hallucinations appeared and disappeared several times before Rakrak's eyes. He thought the wriggling motion seemed familiar, and his realization wasn't far off. He was thinking that the movement of these bugs is similar to the engravings that the ancient people made on the golden tablet. With this, Rakrak thought of a few things and drew on the ground with a stick. At first, he copied the characters on the golden tablet. Then, he doodled things that weren't letters or symbols, and soon after, he erased the lines that he had left on the ground with his hands, lost in his thoughts. Now he was considering that it might not be the gold that won't rot with this golden tablet, but might be something else. And with this, he had spent the night writing on the ground with the stick, and when morning arrived, Rakrak went to YUGIOH's tent and woke her up, which she initially thought that there might be something wrong, but Rakrak clarified that he has something to show her, and Rakrak seemed somewhat excited, so she decided to follow him. And as they went over to a clear ground, Rakrak started writing. He first drew a triangle and two perpendicular lines with the stick, and explained to YUGIOH that this was him, a male lizard. This intrigued YUGIOH, so she asked to explain further. So then Rakrak drew an inverted triangle and two lines, and explained that this was her, to be precise, a female lizard. And seeing that YUGIOH understood what he meant, Rakrak then proceeded to draw two lines between the two drawings. Rakrak fell silent after drawing these two lines, so YUGIOH had no choice but to ask first. In response, with a more sincere tone, Rakrak explained that this symbol meant becoming each other's companion, and this is also his answer to what she asked. With this, they looked at each other's eyes intently, but YUGIOH felt that something is missing in those symbols that Rakrak wrote. So she took the stick from Rakrak and drew a circle. And YUGIOH asked Rakrak if he get what this means, and with certainty, he answered that he does. And with that, the two lizards fell in silence under the soft light of the early sun, as they were in the moment of clarity, comfort, and a feeling of being exactly where they were meant to be. A system notification popped up, notifying Nebula that Rakrak had indeed invented writing, and so Nebula cheered in joy on the inside as there was no one to even watch him if he expressed it. However, it'll still take lots of generations to develop more. Nevertheless, it was still the beginning stage of the game. Now, Nebula just have to enjoy the show, because as Rakrak and YUGIOH decided to be each other's companion, the clan celebrated this matter with a festival. On the surface, it might seem like a simple hunt, but capturing the largest prey to present to their spouse is how lizard men celebrate their wedding ceremonies. And Rakrak once again proved his eligibility as a companion by offering the largest deer to his bride. But to their surprise, YUGIOH had managed to catch a deer as well, but she made it look so easy compared to how Rakrak did it. Even Nebula couldn't hold a faint laugh to come out. It seems like Rakrak would have an interesting married life. After the wedding, Rakrak gave the land back to the orcs, which the orc couldn't believe what he just heard. And so he asked Rakrak if he was sure, confidently. Rakrak answered that he was, as the monster was an obstacle they had to defeat after all, and he also mentioned this was their land to begin with, so they can just live here again, just like they used to. With this, the Orc Lord couldn't help his tear to come out. He didn't expect someone to be this kind, and so with all his heart, he bowed to Rakrak and expressed how thankful he was. Now they owe him and his clan a great favor, and he would like to repay it. And since they are planning to go deeper on the mountains, he offered that his son lead the way for them, as they have lived here for a long time, so they know a path through the mountains that is wider and isn't as rugged, to which Rakrak gladly nodded at the generous gesture. But before they could leave, the Orc Lord thanked Rakrak once more, because before this, they used to live while being pestered by bigger beasts and larger tribes. But because of him, they might just be able to overcome it, and they will never forget this favor. This made Rakrak smile, and so he nodded in understanding. And just like that, Rakrak and his clan went on their way in a hurry. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, Nebula knew this game wasn't that easy. The reason why there were so many random encounters and negative events in the Lost World is probably because it is based on a real world, and he can already foresee what the next event will be. And just like what Nebula had expected, just within the next few days, Rakrak learned of another tribe not too far away that was also constantly scouting for danger around them. Rakrak didn't recognize the footprints, but the Starcatcher did. It's a frog footprint. Rakrak knew much when it came to the frogs. They were slippery, swam well, jumped up and down, and some even had poison. And he knew all this because they are able to eat the ones with poison now after God gave them his blessing. And many frogs lived in the ponds, and when the end of winter came, they would run out of food and had to come out of hibernation. The lizardmen would catch and eat them. The footprints looked similar to the ones left by those frogs the lizardmen had eaten, but were very different in size. And so Stargazer clarified that it came from the frogmen, a species that walks on two legs. They can also speak and think like them. This surprised Rakrak, as frogmen were a rare sight given their natural habitats were few and far between, such as rivers and lakes. Even for lizardmen with their wide range of activities, frogmen were hard to come by. And so Rakrak eagerly searched through the bushes and counted the footprints. To his surprise, there isn't just one, but quite a bit of them. With this number, it seemed like they are a larger tribe than them. And this footprint indicate that they must be scouting as well. This prompted Rakrak to ask Stargazer if these frogmen are belligerent, to which he responded that they might be, as they made their home here first. But that's not always the case. They're the same as any other bipedal species. Some are good, and some are bad. With this, Rakrak decided to return to their temporary base to discuss this with others. After the meeting was done, Rakrak told everyone to set up their camps as wide as many as possible. This idea that came from Jael had a purpose to deceive the frogmen into thinking their clan is large when seen from the outside. And there are lots of trees, so it's easy to make a fire. And they will have a bunch of guards keep an eye on the fires at night. And if they make more fires here and there, the frogmen will think their group is twice the actual size, despite the fires not being of use. It will also be good to keep watch at night, keeping in mind that the warriors will go on a reconnaissance. This was a sound idea. However, Rakrak pointed out that the work should be equally distributed amongst the lizardmen staying guard so that no one complains, which she understood. And with that, a few moments had passed by, and their plans had come into reality, and now they felt more confident to take rest even though the other tribe will be watching them. And true to their expectations, just beyond the mountains, several frog silhouettes could be seen, and a few days had passed. They switched bases. Fortunately, they did not encounter any frogmen, and during that time, they had prepared a lot of things to ensure the tribe's safety. At this point, Nebula even doubted there are many players who are more successful than him, as cattle breeding went smoothly, and their housing lifestyles were quickly evolving to adapt to the changed environment. The most fascinating thing was how quickly they established the concept of writing, and that is all thanks to Rakrak, who was actively using the written language he had recently discovered. When the warriors came back from reconnaissance, he would always listen to what they saw at the big wide rock in the middle of the village, and he will always mark the shape of the river onto the large rock. On the rock, the village was marked at the center, and distances were marked based on a particular scale to show the topography of the area. To be exact, it was a map that was developed from hunting marks, but the idea of making a permanent record like written language was applied. This record was actually useful, helping the warriors that were split into groups to figure out the surrounding terrains while Rakrak was away. And this served as an opportunity for the clan to become interested in the utility of writing and records, which were made possible because their now more stable lifestyles allowed them more spare time. Rather than having them overwork themselves, Rakrak recommended keeping written record as they went about their various activities. As an example, he told them they could each write down how many pieces of fruit they had collected every day, so that it was possible to know exactly who worked less and who worked more. And once the lizard men started recording things, the ones who were more diligent reduced the amount they collected by a reasonable margin, rather than criticizing their fellow lizard men, while those who fell short collected more. This proved to be effective in improving everyone's productivity. It was just as Rakrak had expected. However, he gained more insights than he had expected. He realized that when they relied on their memories, they would live by compromising. It caused emotional stress since some were more diligent, while others got lazy, and no one was able to say anything because there was no clear evidence. Now, though, everyone is being careful as they know records are permanent. And although Rakrak's idea hadn't been recognized by the game system, Nebula noticed what Rakrak's idea stemmed from. A simple discovery was meaningless. Once the culture of writing and recording began, they could do a greater variety of things than before, and realizing the importance of this idea was the first step. With this, Nebula was delighted, as they're doing better than he thought they would. And Nebula hadn't been able to pay much attention to Rakrak's clan recently. Even though Rakrak's clan was Nebula's only tribe, he had many other things to do, just like in the game of the Lost World, as gods had many more responsibilities outside of managing their tribes. Nebula currently had 3 large swarms of insects. These swarms weren't simply controlled by Nebula. Each group had grown into their own entity. One of these swarms was the swarm of locusts in the west that indirectly benefited Rakrak and his clan. These locusts focused on disrupting and eliminating factors that could pose a threat, or create unnecessary variables to Rakrak's clan. And the second swarm of insects, which Rakrak and his clan weren't even aware of, were in the far south of the forest. In the game, there was a trick called Small Area XP Farming, and the south of the forest was dedicated for this. At this place, Nebula was creating and cultivating all kinds of insects to transform the area into a nest full of insects. Because of this, Nebula was able to level up his small area from 3 to 4, which in turn gave him a new skill. But this is a method he wouldn't have dreamt of doing if there were other players nearby, because they definitely wouldn't just watch and do nothing at the sight of this kind of farming. But because Nebula's starting location was on the outer part of the peninsula, it seemed that other players hadn't discovered it yet, and he definitely has to take advantage of the fact that he started in an area with only a few other players. But if other players were around, there would be many technical benefits from a clash of civilizations, just like when Rakrak's clan and the Blue Skin tribe met. So rather than Nebula being ahead of the other players, it could be said that he was trying to make up for potential losses, at least for now. And the fact that Rakrak's capability and the status of the tribe are currently above average, so he was more confident to get ahead of others. But this is just the beginning, because what will happen next will be even more dangerous than anything ever experienced. So then, Nebula observed the first encounter between the two tribes, as one of Rakrak's warrior went up to him and notified him that the frogmen were coming towards them. In response, Rakrak reminded the warrior of the importance of providing detailed information in such reports, specifically the number of enemies, their armament, and the speed of their approach. The warrior quickly apologized for the oversight and then provided the necessary details. There were 7 in the group. All of them were armed, and they are slowly making their way towards them. And there is one more thing that even Rakrak was briefly surprised by what the warrior said, but he decided not to think too deeply about it before he saw and judged things for himself. And being armed but approaching on foot means there's a chance for conversation. Their numbers are also small. With this, Rakrak decided to lead 10 armed warriors to meet the frogmen before they reached the village. He took 10 because they needed more numbers for safety. But they also shouldn't look intimidating just to have a conversation. And as the two tribes met at a small clearing in the forest, the warriors had been observing and delivering information about the frogmen until now, so their first sight of the frogmen wasn't completely unfamiliar. Their skin was slippery, and they were somewhat smaller than lizardmen. They were characterized by their large eyes and transparent eyelids, and their short necks and bodies that looked hard and firm seemed common for frogmen. And Rakrak confirmed that the special note relayed by the warrior was true. There were 6 frogmen, and next to them was a lizardman with grayish-brown scales, which made him think the possibility that this was an effort to make peace. And seeing the tension between the group, the leader of the frogmen broke the ice by introducing himself first. He called himself Shunan, son of the great tribe leader Oloi, and they have no intention of fighting them. Seeing that these frogmen were courteous in their own way, Rakrak also introduced himself, and he also emphasized that they have no intention of raising their weapons. And as the two leaders spoke to each other, both tribes that were standing guard returned to a resting position. Still, Rakrak couldn't help but think it would have been better if the tribal leader had come himself. But Rakrak didn't expect that much, so he gets straight to the point and asked them the reason they were here. to which Shunin explained that they have come to let them know that his tribe has invaded their territory. It was just as Rakrak had expected. There was no need to accept Shunin's words as an attack. After all, only by stating that their opponent was in the wrong could one press for an advantage. Still, Rakrak knew how to deflect this, so he stated that he wouldn't say the whole land is their territory, as there was no sign suggesting that this land had an owner already, and therefore they didn't know. But he apologized for not noticing they were here first, and Shunen didn't say anything for a moment after Rakrak made a clear apology, as he recognized that Rakrak had gotten one over on him. And seeing their reactions, Rakrak continued to clarify things up. He stated that their circumstance is a bit different, as they have come from a place very far away. He is not sure if they will settle down long term, but they need to stay here for now as they have no other place to go. This made Shunen stutter as he doesn't know how to respond, but Rakrak did, and so he used his glib tongue to state that is his first time seeing frogmen. But Shunen, son of the great tribal leader Aoloi, seemed like a warrior capable of making decisions, and is the only one who has the authority to show them mercy and grant their request. And Shunen couldn't come up with anything contrarian, so he ended up agreeing with Rakrak. He was even proud to boast that this is possible with his authority as the next leader of the tribe. And as Shunen was dancing on the top of Rakrak's palm, he noticed the big warrior standing beside Shunen glancing at him. It was a look of dissatisfaction. With this, he figured out that the tribal chief probably assigned that warrior to his son because he doesn't trust him, while keeping a closer watch on them, but he still has a lot of questions in mind, and therefore he decided to be extra careful in collecting information. With this in mind, Rakrak suggested that instead of talking here, Shunen should come to their village to be welcomed since both tribes have come to an agreement without much conflict. And when Shunen was about to go along with what Rakrak had suggested, the big warrior whispered something into Shunen's ear. Shunen's attitude suddenly changed, so instead of going with Rakrak's idea, he just stated that they don't have a lot to thank each other for, and he doesn't think they have that much mutual trust built yet. Still, Rakrak couldn't let them leave just yet, so he stated that them lizardmen can't just send Shunen off after being indebted to him for what he has done for them. So he suggests to have a meal at this spot instead, and before Shunen could respond, he turned to the big warrior, and the warrior nodded. With this, Rakrak and Shunen is now sitting across each other while they are waiting for the deer to be cooked. But now that Rakrak was able to let them stay a little longer, his mind was preoccupied on how to find out more about the relationship between that single lizard with these frogmen, and what their intentions were in coming together. But he can't let them know that he is curious, because if they realize he want to know more, they'll use it to their advantage. With this in mind, Rakrak started a casual conversation with Shunen. He stated that he may accept that the land around here is the frogmen territory, but he wants to know on what grounds they are saying this. This prompted Shunen to point out the decorative feathers hanging around his neck, and stated with pride that these are the feathers of the cockatrice that lives in a forest nearby. But as expected, Rakrak doesn't have a clue on what that is, so Shunen explained that they are dangerous animals who live around this forest. Huge birds that walk on their 2 feet. They are not just large in size but poisonous as well, and it is very difficult for them to catch, and they never manage to kill it in their many encounters, but only barely chasing it away, because aside from their speed, they also have a wide range of movement. They are the reason why they keep watch around the area. And because of Shunen's descriptions, Rakrak was curious on how they managed to deal with the cockatrice, so he asked Shunen if they use a javelin as a weapon, but this just made Shunen smirk, knowing the fact that they are far above these lizardmen as the only long-ranged weapon they could think of is a javelin. And Rakrak also noticed Shunen's subtle smugness. Still, it didn't bother him as he was more curious on what these frogmen could offer, and so he let Shunen be the smuglord that he was. And as expected, Shunen excitedly want to show off their weapon, the bow and arrow, and Rakrak took interest in the weapon he hadn't heard of, and the lizardmen hadn't seen a bow before since they grew up in places where there weren't many species of trees and thus were short on wood supplies, and so he looked at Shunen intently. Surprisingly, Shunen called out the lizard with them who was named Owen, asking him a favor if Owen could bring him his bow and arrow, which Owen gladly responded that he will. And seeing that Shunen was considerate of the lizard, it left a positive impression on Rakrak. And after Owen handed the bow to him, Shunen asks Owen once again to set up an appropriately sized wooden board on the tree nearby so that he could practice his archery, which Owen gladly did. But with just this, Rakrak's impression of them immediately changed, as he noticed a strange power relation between Shunen and the lizardman Owen. Shunen acts like he's asking a favor, but it seems to him that Owen is an errand boy. However, anyone compared to the son of the tribal chief would seem like an errand boy, so he didn't say anything, and just observed Owen do his work and watched Shunen's archery practice. The arrow Shunen shot flew with a whoosh and struck the middle of the target, This impressed Rakrak, and as Rakrak admired Shunen's skills, he was also picturing in his head how to respond if they were to fight the frogmen. But as he was thinking this, Shunen then boasted about how they learn archery from when they were young, and he is one of the best archers in their tribe, which Rakrak responded in kind, but he was more curious on how to handle the bow. So he asked Shunen if he could also use this weapon called bow, to which Shunen gladly handed the bow to him, but he emphasized to Rakrak that it will be hard since it's his first time after all. But Rakrak didn't hear a single thing that Shunen had said, as he was more enticed with the weapon that he was holding, and as he inspected the weapon, he noticed the branch and string are definitely sturdy. Its power is weak compared to a javelin, but he can carry few arrows around. It's also a lot more precise than a javelin and has a faster attack speed. It's a weapon they absolutely need, and therefore he would like to look into this roughly to his heart's content. But as Shunen stated, his skills with the bow were trash. Strength wasn't an issue. It was a skill issue, because a beginner is still a beginner even if they are strong. So Rakrak couldn't hit shit, just like how a stormtrooper start their daily training. And he missed his shot like the plank of wood had a plot armor. Still, Shunen was kind enough to say inspiring words and avoid saying anything rude. But as Rakrak was still inspecting the bow, Shunen asks Owen, what is he doing, not collecting the arrows? And so Owen ran immediately to collect it, while Shunen was somewhat irritated of the fact that he still has to remind of Owen of this. But this was a great opportunity for Rakrak, and so he explained to Shunen that he shot those arrows, and therefore he should have been the one to go pick them, which Shunen was caught off guard by this, since Rakrak was a leader after all. But this might be just the way of the lizardmen, so he let Rakrak do what he pleases. And as Rakrak picked up an arrow from the ground, Shunen shrugged and shifted his gaze to where the meal was being prepared. With this, Rakrak picked up another arrow and approached Owen. But Owen panicked like he didn't know how he should behave in front of Rakrak, which he thinks that it was a strange reaction. But still, Rakrak went through with his plan and tried to interrogate Owen, asking why is a lizardman like him with the frogmen, which Owen stuttered a while before finzing his voice to explain it was because lizardmen and frogmen are living together. Rakrak was thrown off as he never imagined such a thing would be possible. If different species lived together, their differing lifestyles would inevitably lead to conflicts. Rakrak didn't think of frogmen this way, but some other species would be disgusted by the physiological aspect of frogmen. Even if a friendly relationship was maintained, it was normal for communities to divide. And so Rakrak asks Owen to explain further, to which Owen did, and it was because both species are of help to each other. This was a surprise to Rakrak, and so out of pure curiosity, he asked Owen to be specific about it, and Owen replied as if he had rehearsed what to say, stating that, in exchange for receiving protection from frogmen, them lizards can help out by doing tasks that are inconvenient for the frogmen, as frogmen can't live outside of water for too long. Lizardmen are also better than frogmen at climbing trees or picking fruits, and lizardmen in return can eat the fish in the water. What Owen had said sounded like they were helping each other, but something was strange to Rakrak, and there was no doubt sharing food is good. But Rakrak pointed out to Owen that lizardmen doesn't need protection, because lizardmen have the ability to defend themselves. This made Owen shook his head, but he seemed surprised, as he panically tried to convince Rakrak that this forest is dangerous, and Owloy's frogmen are a big tribe. It will be hard for them lizardmen to survive without the frogmen. And Rakrak wanted to ask more, but he was starting to feel the weight of Shunen's gaze, and he doesn't like what he heard. So he told Owen to forget the conversation they just had, and just pretend that he only asked about how to be good at archery. Afterwards, the two groups ate while having small talk, but as soon as Shunen got to eat the meat, he was gladly surprised of the flavor that was in it. Just by adding fragrant herbs, it made the meat even more delicious. And seeing that Shunen knows how to enjoy a large, juicy meat, Rakrak asked Shunen if he had ever tried a water buffalo, which made Shunen more excited than before, as he had eaten one, but it's been a while since he had caught one, but even still he could remember how delicious it tastes. And since Shunen was visibly interested in the buffaloes they had, he asked if Shunen is willing. They could trade for a pouch of arrows, to which Shunen was about to agree. However, he instantly changed his mind as soon as he noticed the facial expression of one of his guards glaring at him intently. So it seems like there was no chance they would trade even a single bow. But Rakrak just reacted stoically as to not garner some suspicions from Shunen's guards. Still, Shunen just broke the tension again, clarifying that they will delve into those discussions when their friendly relations deepen, and likely it would not be too far off. As they could see, the members of their own tribe do not bear hostility with lizardmen. They're being friendly to not just Owen who came here with them, but the rest of the lizard warriors. And that's all because the two races live together in their village. To further prove this, Shunen called out Owen and asks him to explain to Rakrak how they have spent the past few months helping each other out, which Owen was glad to be of service. as long as it will promote friendship between them. But Rakrak just looked at Owen with suspicious eyes, because as expected, they brought it up so easily as if they had prepared for this beforehand. And if Rakrak hadn't interrogated Owen first, he would have believed every word that came out of Shunan's mouth. And like Owen, Shunan also seemed to have a speech prepared, which raised Rakrak's suspicion even more. And after that facade was over, Rakrak offered for the two tribes to meet again. Such events were mainly for tribes to exchange or share food to make them closer. Shunan gladly accepted the offer, prompting Rakrak to suggest to meet them somewhere a bit closer to their tribe next time, instead of having them come from afar, which Shunan was about to accept. But just like before, standing next to Shunan was Oboy the guard, and once again he interrupted before he could accept Rakrak's offer. So, Shunan immediately changed his decision, and now he stated that this place is fine, and there is nothing that blocks their vision, and it's a good place for both tribes to keep an eye on each other, which Rakrak just accepted it to avoid further tension between the two tribes. And with that, the two tribes decided when to meet and went their separate ways, and Rakrak saw Owen glancing back at him a few times through the group of frogmen returning home. This was enough of a confirmation that there is definitely something going on. Even Jowl saw through their lies, as they were too obvious. The way they act doesn't look like the relationship of people on an equal footing. A few hours later, along the lake where Oloy's frogmen settled down and made home, Owen, the lizard man, collapsed on a small sandy beach, as he was slapped hard by Shunan, accusing Owen of revealing confidential information to the lizardmen's tribe leader because of how wary they were. And knowing that saying the truth wouldn't do him good, Owen bowed his head and clarified to them that the tribe leader of the lizardmen only asked him how to be a good archer, and he only answered that question. But the warrior Oboy found it ridiculous as Owen couldn't even shoot an arrow properly. So he then kicked Owen on the side while Shunan just watched. Then Owen tumbled on the ground with a grunt. But even with this, Owen still explained to them that he only told him that he could use a bow so that it wouldn't make the lizardmen's tribe leader less suspicious of them, which was a sound reasoning for Shunan. And seeing their demeanor change, Owen explained further that the lizardmen's tribe leader then kept asking how a bow is made as he didn't think the frogmen would tell him. But he said that he couldn't tell him because he was in great debt to the frogmen, and if he really wanted to learn archery, he told him that he should pay a fee first. But he said regretfully that he couldn't give him anything right away and gave up asking. With this, Shunan was impressed of how shrewd Owen is, and so Shunan looked at Oboy signaling that he thinks that would be enough, which Oboy also thinks as well, and as if nothing happened, Shunan praised Owen, as expected from the sharp trickster they knew of, and as Owen felt relieved that the interrogation was done, Shunan reminded Owen that his role in this was big, which he understood quite well. And seeing Shunan was talking with his head turned towards the lake, Owen followed his gaze. There was a small island in the middle of the lake, on which were a few huts obscured by bushes. The frogmen warriors took turns surveilling the area closely. Young lizardmen were trapped inside of the huts, and among them was Owen's child. And as Owen was thinking of this, Shunan smirked wide and clear and told Owen how lucky he really was. He was about to offer those children as sacrifice, but the new sacrifices have found their way here instead, so he is very lucky indeed. To which Owen just looked down and nodded, and knowing that this was an open threat, Owen showed to them how eager he was, and promised to them that he will definitely deceive the other lizards in any way possible. And Owen clenched his teeth while saying so. If he had known, he wouldn't have worked so hard to come all the way here. Truth be told, they hadn't started out here. They hadn't come from the wilderness either, but they had been looking for a home as they had been attacked by several forces in the south. It was then Auloy's frogmen took the exhausted lizardmen in and warmly welcomed them. Outside of their different skin color, they welcomed them even though they were of another species. But of course it was all trickery. The frogmen invested time to grant them favors and kindly accepted the grayish-brown lizardmen into their tribe. The lizardmen began to live a somewhat pleasant life alongside and under the influence of the frogmen. Then came the day the two tribes decided to hold a brotherly ritual, and everything changed. The grayish-brown lizardmen went kayaking with the frogmen warriors to enjoy a banquet held in the middle of the island. The lizardmen suspected nothing and had gotten completely drunk on the alcohol Auloy gave them. But the moment they passed out, they were all captured by the frogmen warriors. And the frogmen tribe currently had 1,500 frogmen, and 200 grayish-brown lizardmen were enslaved by them. Aside from the difference in numbers, the lizardmen children and their caregivers were all held hostage on the island, so the other lizardmen never tried to make a stand against the frogmen. And the most problematic thing was that the frogmen had a god, and that god demanded living sacrifices. The god didn't want the sacrifice to be animals, but instead wanted people, more specifically, beings that had a conscience and walked on two legs. And so, the tribal chief and warriors of the lizardmen were offered. The other grayish-brown lizard men could clearly see what was happening on the island from across the lake. The monster chewed on and ate the tribal chief and warriors one by one, spitting out parts that tasted bad. Even as the lizard men bore witness to the horrifying sight of their fellow men getting eaten alive, they couldn't do anything out of fear. Owen had also been among the lizard men watching, and Owen was shrewd, just like Shunin had said. He knew what kind of attitude he had to have in order to survive and protect his family. Owen knew that it would be more advantageous to approach the son Shunin instead of the old and large Oloi. Owen wasn't a warrior, but he would have been regarded as the wise one among his tribe, and he learned to be obedient at the present time. But still, reality hadn't changed. The two-headed fiend liked soft flesh. If old lizard men were sacrificed, it would only kill them, and then it would demand the next sacrifice to be offered right away. Sometimes it would even secretly go after and swallow frogmen, saying that the lizard men's flesh was too thick. And on those days, the frogmen would hit the lizard men and hurriedly sacrifice the children. So the reality is, the two-headed fiend rules over the frogmen, and the frogmen rule over them. This won't change. And in Owen's opinion, things couldn't be changed if they weren't meant to be changed. The number of grayish-brown lizardmen had been rapidly decreasing ever since they were subjugated by the frogmen. They were either sacrificed or beaten to death, and if some managed to run away, the same number of lizardmen would then be sacrificed. It was inevitable that Owen's child would be claimed someday. But the opportunity has come. It was worth enduring everything until now. Even though the size of the new lizardman tribe was still unknown, their population didn't seem small, though he doesn't think they have enough to fight against the frogmen. According to the frogmen warriors, there were about 600 lizardmen. Owen had considered inciting a fight between the frogmen and the lizardmen, but he thought the 600 lizardmen would just be outnumbered, and it would be impossible for them to defeat the two-headed fiend. The black-scaled lizardmen wouldn't stand a chance should a battle break out. They were a barbaric tribe from a distant land and didn't even know what a bow and arrow was. In addition to that, the frogmen had a secret weapon. Even if their grayish-brown scaled lizardman tribal chief and warriors had fought the frogmen, they wouldn't have stood a chance. Everything is already set in stone. So the only possibility that Owen could really hold on to was to let the black-scaled lizard to be sacrificed first, as they can live a lot longer time if that happens. He doesn't care about others, or even his own survivability. All he wanted was that his son lives a little longer. And a few days had passed on the side of Rakrak's tribe. It had been several days since their first encounter with the frogmen. Since then, Rakrak's clan and the frogmen had met 3 more times, and Rakrak's clan was able to exchange quite a few items that they liked. And when the 4th meeting arrived, Rakrak's clan had offered the frogmen a buffalo, which made Shunin happy to see a magnificent beast. And it's alive at that. And seeing Shunin's reaction, Rakrak again stated to him that this should be enough for the bow. But Shunin was hesitant about this. He knew they couldn't afford to give their weapons to the other tribe with just a few buffalo. But even before Shunin could respond, just like what Shunin had done, Owen stepped up to broke the tension off and suggested that before they could trade weapons, why don't they first get to know each other first? Plus, they do not know anything about the Black Scale tribe yet, so they would like to visit their village. Then they might be able to gift them a bow. And the bow was in fact a secondary issue to Rakrak. While it would definitely become a useful tool if they learned how to use it, the large frogman tribe was the main problem. Even though the 2 tribes had gotten quite close, the frogmen had never shown them their village. Their reason was that Rakrak's clan hadn't welcomed the frogmen into their village either. However, in Rakrak's opinion, he thought that because the frogmen tribe was larger, they should be the ones to show their village first. With this in mind, he refused the offer that Shunin had gave. But the trade today wasn't for nothing, because as they were exchanging items, the lizardmen that were smart and had good vision would sneak a look at the bows and pretend to borrow and use it to take a closer look. But this approach had its limits. And so even with this, the arrow that they shot with their replica of a bow just flies about half as far as they shoot. It was not even close. This was the limit for imitated objects. Even though they tried to imitate it perfectly, they can't seem to figure out what exact material was used to make the bowstring. It seemed like the tendons of a creature were torn and weaved back together when they saw it last time. And they only used 1 buffalo for practice. It'll be better if they kill and use a few more buffaloes. But the problem was that they can't. They used too many for the exchanges. So it seemed like there's nothing more they can do. This is the limit for now. And if they happen to use the tendons of a cockatrice, it would be too difficult for them to also get a hold of some. And the 5th meeting was underway. But they weren't thinking of bringing with them any buffaloes this time, but a piece of the large monster's shell. They realized that this piece of shell could only be damaged by Rakrak when God assumed control over his body. Not even iron or other tools could leave a single scratch. This mysterious shell was valuable on its own. But apart from that, It could be used to boast that they had killed such a monster. They might not believe it, but they'll likely become cautious at the least. And this was necessary since all of those frogmen acted the same as Owen. So there's no mistake that they're trying to play a dirty trick. The problem is they don't know how they're going to play it. But even though exchanges with the frogmen were underway, Rakrak always made sure to stay alert. It wasn't easy for the frogmen to scout around Rakrak's clan, and he knows too well that they must make some progress today. So he asked Jael if she checked if their people have collected a lot of the medicine that apparently treats itchiness well, to which she confirmed. And it was apparently easy, as the herbalist knew of a place where the medicinal herb abundantly grew. This was such a good news for Rakrak, as he heard. The Frogman tribe was currently suffering from an itching illness, but fortunately, no one in Rakrak's clan had contracted it. This might also be by the grace of the nameless beetle god. But even with this, Rakrak was wishing that guy named Owen to be their key, which Jael overheard, so she suggested to give that Owen guy a chance. This made Rakrak think for a while, but a suggestion coming from his wife was a big deal, so he considered it. Meanwhile, back on the Frogman's village, Owen was being choked by Oboy as his plans didn't work out this time either. But seeing that Owen's face is already turning blue, Shunan told to stop, otherwise he might actually die. But Oboy just continued as he was still dissatisfied with Owen, and seeing that he won't stop anytime soon, Owen gathered every oxygen that he could get to clarify things to them. He didn't mean to fail again, but these lizard men with black scales and water buffalo skulls on their heads seem especially vigilant. In response, Oboy insultingly asks Owen if he is saying these new lizards are different from they were, who were completely ignorant and just accepted everything, which Owen tried his best to reply with a smile, and just agreed with him. But with the cowardly attitude that Owen displayed, Oboy felt disgusted with him. He didn't even want Owen to be at close proximity with him any longer, and so he throw Owen to the ground and just leave Owen to Shunan. After Oboy was nowhere to be seen, Shunan told Owen that it would be better for him to hurry, obtain as much information from them as he can, and if possible, he must try his best to invite him and his warriors to their village without raising any suspicions. This was a surprise to Owen, and the way Shunan had said it seemed to imply that something was wrong going on behind the scene, so he immediately asks Shunan what it was. But it seems that Shunan was hesitating whether to tell Owen or not. Still, Owen could only wait for Shunan's reply in the most subservient manner. Luckily, Oboy wasn't here to stop Shunan from telling him, and Shunan decided that it would be okay for him to know. With this, Shunan revealed that his father, the tribal chief, wishes to hurry and carry out the living sacrifice. This was indeed a shocking news to Owen, since there was still quite some time until the sacrifice should be held. This was because they had hurriedly done so not long ago, and the ritual was held to get revelations from the two-headed fiend about Rakrak's clan. But nothing much came out of it compared to the value of the sacrifices, so he can't understand why they want to hold another ritual. So Owen just patiently waited for Shunan to reveal more, and probably this information only shared among frogmen, so he must listen carefully. And just as he wanted, Shunan revealed to him that the disease is getting worse for the elders, his father included. This only confused Owen, as the only disease think of was the itching illness, which he believes it wasn't particularly life-threatening. But to his surprise, Shunan revealed to him that it was indeed a much dangerous disease. A priest died of this itching illness yesterday. They didn't tell them lizardmen, but once they get the itching illness, a sticky white layer of mucus begins to cover their skin, and that area becomes itchy. No matter how hard one tries to wipe it away, the mucus doesn't disappear, but continuously expands. It becomes hard to breathe once an infected was covered with the mucus for a certain period of time, and eventually, they die. Owen listened with no facial expressions, and because of how smart he was, he knew that Shunan is testing him. This is the first time he is hearing that this itching illness is a deadly disease. But this also explains why some of the frogmen haven't been showing themselves lately. Everything makes sense now. Some of them are probably already dead, and he knows all too well that he couldn't appear glad or surprised. And therefore, Owen put on a sad expression, and stated that he should also be careful so word of this doesn't spread, because some healthy and energetic lizard men may make fun of the frogmen, to which Shunan just casually responded, "That's obvious." But he admitted that they won't be able to hide the fact forever. And seeing that this was Shunan's main concern, Owen quickly thought of something, and so he stated that even if word spreads, there is a way to keep the lizard men in check. They can tell them that it could also spread to lizard men, which Shunan thought was a good idea, but the problem was it wouldn't really spread to them. To his surprise, Owen already has a solution for that. He revealed that there are grasses that create white foam if one mashed them, and also grasses that make one itch. And he is the one making the most contact with the frogmen. So all he has to do is pretend that he got it from them. This was such a sound plan. Even Shunan couldn't help himself but get excited. And as Shunan was about to compliment Owen, he He somehow couldn't think of an appropriate word to use and ended up mumbling. Then he thought of a good word to refer to Owen as a charlatan, which wasn't even a great compliment to say the least. But what could he do? And so he just laughs it off. But as Owen thought he had overcome a hurdle, Shunin went closer to him and whispered that his father's itching illness is becoming worse. He is a strong man, so he is holding against the disease longer than anyone else, but he is slowly losing energy. He wishes to be treated by offering a sacrifice to the two-headed fiend. Different from last time. They need a large-scale living sacrifice. They will need quite a lot this time. He is not quite sure how much, but they might sacrifice as much as possible until it works. And his father was a bit sad that there were quite a bit of children in the huts in the middle of the island, and that they weren't being used as sacrifices. And it seemed that Shunin didn't think too much about the lives of the lizard men that were going to be abandoned anyway. However, Owen got shivers down his spine. He can't get the fact that these frogmen was planning to sacrifice them until it works. So he cursed at that damn two-headed fiend, as it was incompetent at doing anything. It's just a giant man-eating, commotion-making and threatening monster, just like how they are slaves to this freaking frogs. They are slaves to that monster. If it could cure the disease, it wouldn't have let them get it in the first place. However, Owen did not express these thoughts, and just stayed silent. But surprisingly, as his blood boils inside, Shunin promised that if he just lured out the black-scale lizardmen, he will unconditionally exclude his children from being sacrificed. And just with these few words, Owen's rage instantly dissipate. He even thanked Shunin for this, and promised that he will do his best. However, before Shunin could leave, Owen requested to at least reconsider trading a few bows for the negotiations. This irritated Shunin, but before he could respond, Owen explained that he saw the lizardmen's tribe leader get anxious like a child every time they showed him the bows, so he think it is the right time for them to give them what they want in order to get what they need. With this, Shunin was convinced, and now he believed that one bow isn't too great of a sacrifice if that means they can enslave them all, and the bow would eventually return to their possession anyway. And Owen thought he had put a lot of work into the last 4 meetings. There was no mistake that the young lizardman called Rakrak was a pretty strong warrior. However, he is not sure if he is a wise tribal chief. Just because one is a good fighter doesn't mean one would be a good chief. And he knows this because he experienced it himself. Being obsessed over a good and new weapon was a virtue for a warrior, but not for a chief. And Rakrak won't be able to handle the frogmen, let alone the two-headed fiend. And just like what Shunin just said, it wouldn't matter that they gave them a few more bows, because if they succeed in enticing him, the weapons they have would return safely to them. With this, they were confident that the next meeting would be the last. The next day, the 5th meeting had started, and the lizardmen warriors and frogmen warriors were getting familiar with each other's faces. So the 5th meeting wasn't going too bad. Those who brought new goods to barter began to talk to each other and bargain. However, Owen the trickster knew there was not much information to get out of those lizardmen. He doesn't know how Rakrak the chief is keeping them quiet, but they don't say anything other than talking about trading goods. This guy named Rakrak is totally different. Even the exchange with Rakrak was much better than Owen had expected, so Owen wondered how Rakrak had been holding it in until now. But the tribal chief now pleaded for at least 1 bow in exchange for the abundant medicinal herbs they had collected. But Shunin didn't approve of it so easily. Even if he had approved to trade some bows yesterday, he was trying to get more out of Rakrak. And so he explained that he couldn't do just that for the time being, as they need a certain level of faith before trading weapons. But Rakrak already anticipated this, and so instead of just letting these frogmen walk all over them, he used this opportunity to get what he wanted. Basically, Rakrak suggested for the sake of the faith of both tribes, he has a request to make, and that is he would like a separate conversation with Owen, which Shunin approved while Oboy opposed the suggestion, but Oboy eventually caved given the attitude Rakrak had displayed. And just as Rakrak and Owen finally got to be alone, Rakrak asks Owen what he wanted, but Owen didn't recognize the change in Rakrak's attitude right away. All Owen thought was that the time had come to say what he had prepared, so he stated that he wanted trust. And just as Rakrak began to wonder what he meant, Owen began to lie. He stated that before them, grayish-brown scaled lizardmen combined tribes with the frogmen. They held a brotherly ritual. Before that ritual was performed, they hung out and shared good things with each other, and also spent time getting to know each other. So he would like it if he tells them more about their tribe, and he too will provide him with as much information about the frogmen as possible. And Rakrak seemed to ponder for a moment on what to say, but he then noticed something on top of Owen's head and quietly laughed. Owen turned around to see what was going on, and saw a blue butterfly flapping its wings behind him, which made him wonder why there was a butterfly in this time of year. It isn't too warm yet, and there haven't been this kind of butterflies around here in the first place, so that's a bit strange. But after seeing the blue butterfly, Rakrak knew exactly what to do, and so he puts all his trust on his god's decision and confidently tell Owen everything about him and his tribe. After the meeting was done, at the Frogman's base, Shunin was praising Owen for a job well done. Rakrak had told Owen almost everything about his clan and their village. That alone was already a great accomplishment, especially just for a single bow. Shunin couldn't even believe it, and so he asked Owen if those idiots of a lizards just said they would come to their village themselves, to which Owen confirmed. Even Oh Boy couldn't believe how foolish they were, and when they invited Shunin and a few of the Frogmen warriors to his village, he thought it might be a trap, but it seems like they were just stupid all along. The Frogmen warriors weren't able to go too far into the village, but they managed to confirm that everything Rakrak had said was true. Thanks to that, they learned the location and size of their village. They even learned about their medical history, and contrary to what the scout had said that the tribe consisted of about 600 people, in reality, there were about 300 people and only 30 warriors. This was such a great find that they couldn't even help themselves from stop smiling. However, Owen didn't smile, and just remained silent. And Shunin never thought Rakrak would come to trust them this much. A lot of it is thanks to Owen, so to reward him, he asked Owen what it is he wanted, which made Owen gulped, as this was the opportunity he had been looking forward to. But he remained humble and polite as to not accidentally provoke these frogmen. He stated that he can only ask what Shunin had promised him earlier. But as expected, Shunin couldn't even remember what it was, and Owen wanted to strike the frogman in front of him for his bad memory, but held himself back, and just helped Shunin remember, stating that if he succeeded in doing something big, he said he would allow his child to come out of the island and live with him. Shunin nodded, but Oh Boy opposed it up front. Luckily, Shunin had a backbone to say otherwise, and he was confident that he can convince his father. He always thought it was necessary to show them lizardmen that if they obey the frogmen well, no, not only obey, but if they serve them well, there will be times where good things can happen. And even if him and his son's life was set to be difficult in the future, Owen couldn't help himself but be thankful of what Shunin had done. A few moments later, Owen was at the same spot again, overlooking at the little island where his son was captive. But now, Owen's heart was full as he felt that his long-cherished dream had finally come true. He will now be able to live with his child. That's all he ever wished for. However, somewhere in his mind he was hesitant. This was all Rakrak's fault. That tribal leader should have been more suspicious and more cautious. But even if he curses Rakrak for being foolish, he can't help but remember the writings that Rakrak had shown him, and the conversations they had about the different characters. Rakrak wrote down characters that he himself and a lot of the other lizardmen in his clan had created and shared with each other. Then he explained the meanings to Owen. These primitive characters were very simple, and there weren't that many. Owen was smart enough to quickly memorize all of them. They're not just simple scribbles or hunting marks. He can combine them to express a different meaning, just like talking. Rakrak then asked Owen, who was quietly listening to the explanations, if he is having fun with this. To which he responded that it is fun, but he doesn't know if it's useful though. And Rakrak immediately corrected him that it's definitely useful. They call these things writings, and he has to know their meanings to understand what is being written, which Owen initially thought was ridiculous since Rakrak was only stating the obvious. But even before he could finish his response, Owen trailed off, realizing what Rakrak's words meant. He's saying that he, who just learned them, and Rakrak himself know what the characters mean, but the other frogmen wouldn't know. And with this, he wondered why Rakrak wanted to tell him this, and not the frogmen. And it seemed as if Rakrak had read his mind. He answered Owen reassuringly that it's because of trust. The things they talked about earlier, the conversation they had about building trust, it wasn't between them, but between him, representing the Lizardmen tribe, and Auloy representing the Frogmen tribe. However, the real trust he wanted to have is between the two of them. This caught Owen off guard, and as if he was ashamed of himself, and doesn't think he deserves such thing. Owen tried to laugh it off, and just deflect what Rakrak had said, stating that there is no need for that, as he was just someone in between the frogmen and him. But even before he could continue, Rakrak called out his name and with a serious tone of voice, he told Owen that they have exchanged trust today, but he does not trust the frogmen. He doesn't believe anything he said about them. He actually believes that there is a lot more to the story that he just said. In response, Owen asked if what everything that they talked about today a lie, to which Rakrak immediately denies, and he can swear on everything he have that his name and everything about his clan is all true. And Rakrak said these words with his eyes wide open, and Owen could see from those eyes that this warrior and tribal chief had a strong sense of pride, and that he'd only told the truth. Owen wouldn't have been able to say that about himself, though. Rakrak then relaxed his facial expression and told him that the most important thing is the trust between them, because he also has the face of someone who is suffering. Owen unconsciously touched his face, As lizardmen had long snouts, they weren't a species known for their wide range of facial expressions. And seeing Owen's facial expression, Rakrak knew that he was on the mark. And so he continued, letting Owen know that he isn't alone, as they know much about suffering as much as he does. Him and his clan know very well what it's like being pushed aside and kicked out, and he saw that in him, and Owen exclaimed without realizing it. And so he quickly shook his head, and told Rakrak that he was not suffering. But Rakrak made him realize that only those who actually suffer say that. And then there was only silence between the two. To break off the silence, Rakrak lightly spun the wooden stick in his hand, and continued writing on the ground. One is an X symbol meaning not or no, and the other one was closely more like a square root symbol, which means lie or fake. And as Rakrak moved his hand, he noticed that Rakrak wrote the two symbols close together, so he pointed it out to Rakrak. With the way he wrote it, it says, "It's not a lie, thus it is true." This immediately impressed Rakrak as he never even thought about it that way. So he praised Owen for being smart. And because of this, Owen gave Rakrak a few ideas, and Rakrak thought it was a valuable discovery. While Owen found this moment strangely joyful and fun, but he realized his voice was shaking. He hadn't had a moment like this since getting enslaved by the frogmen, where he was so immersed in using his intellectual capabilities. It was the feeling wise individuals would get when they discovered a valuable innovation for their civilization. As Owen was telling his ideas to Rakrak, he vaguely thought to himself that it would be great if time would just stop right now. But that didn't happen. Time stops for no one, and so the time for them to get back to their respected group came. But before they could separate, Owen asked if there were nothing else he wanted to talk about, which Rakrak confidently smiled that there is none. He believes that trust has been shared between them, and he has already seen the signals. This confused Owen, but Rakrak didn't say anything further and simply smiled with his teeth showing. Owen could sense that there was something behind Rakrak's appearance of confidence, but he couldn't tell exactly what that was. But even with this, Owen believes that he won't be able to win against this many frogmen and the two-headed fiend. In Owen's head, he thought that it would be hard for the 30 lizardmen warriors to even make a small scratch on the two-headed fiend's scales. They mentioned they've caught a huge monster before. But that kind of news is nothing to those who see a real monster all the time in their everyday life. So even though Rakrak had brought a big and hard piece of the ancient beetle's shell to the barter, the frogmen just saw little value in it, which disappointed Rakrak, so they didn't go ahead with the exchange. It might have been an object that a vagrant